It was supposed to be a joke. A dumb, harmless, late-night joke. Something we'd laugh about later, maybe tell our future partners with a smug. Yeah, that one time we slept together, crazy, right? But instead, here I am, 2 months later, lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering if I just ruined the best friendship I've ever had. Let me backtrack. His name is Jake, and we've been friends since college. 8 years now. From the moment we met, it just clicked. You know how some people are like puzzle pieces that fit perfectly with yours? That's Jake. Same humor, same love for bad 90s action movies, same habit of staying up way too late because neither of us can ever shut up. Over the years, we survived heartbreaks, crappy jobs, family drama, everything. But no matter what, Jake was always there, my constant, my person. And yeah, okay, maybe there was always a tiny spark. A little undercurrent of what if simmering quietly under all the late-night talks and platonic cuddles. But I never let myself go there. Jake was safe, and I didn't want to mess that up with something stupid like feelings. Then, one random Friday night, it happened. We were hanging out at my place, the usual pizza and wine situation. It had been a long week for both of us. His ex had just started posting thirst traps with her new boyfriend, and I was knee-deep in work stress. We were venting about life, laughing way too hard at nothing. And somewhere between the second and third glass of wine, I blurted out, honestly, if we're both still single at 35, we should just marry each other. It was meant to be a joke, a silly, no-pressure what if between two people who were way too comfortable with each other. But Jake didn't laugh. He just gave me this look, half amused, half curious, and said, "Why wait until 35? And before I could think of a snappy comeback, he leaned in and kissed me. I know I should have been surprised, shocked even, but the weird thing is I wasn't. In fact, it felt inevitable, like this was always going to happen at some point. And once that kiss started, there was no stopping it. We stumbled into my bedroom, tripping over furniture, both of us laughing like idiots. It was clumsy and chaotic, and way more familiar than it should have been. But it was also perfect. Every kiss, every touch, it all just fit. Like we'd been waiting for this without even realizing it. Afterward, we lay tangled together under the covers, catching our breath. I remember glancing at him in the dark, my heart pounding. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jake gave me a lazy grin, the kind that always made me want to punch him and kiss him at the same time. Now we sleep. And that was that. The next morning, I expected things to be weird. I mean, how could they not be? But Jake acted like it was just another lazy Saturday, making coffee in his boxers, teasing me about my bedhead, scrolling through his phone like we hadn't just crossed the biggest line in our friendship. For a second, I thought maybe this won't change anything. Maybe we can just go back to normal. Spoiler alert, we couldn't. We didn't talk about that night. Not really. And instead of dealing with it like two emotionally mature adults, we just kept doing it. One hookup turned into two turned into five, and suddenly, we were sleeping together almost every weekend. It became our new routine. Hang out, laugh, have sex, and then pretend like nothing was different. At first, it was amazing. No strings, no drama. Just two best friends having fun. But the problem with sleeping with your best friend? Feelings don't follow the no-strings rule. I started catching myself watching him when he wasn't looking, memorizing the way his hair fell into his eyes, or the way he smiled when he made me laugh. I started craving his touch, not just in bed, but everywhere. His arm around me during movies, his hand brushing against mine at dinner. And before I knew it, I was completely, hopelessly in love with him. The worst part? I had no idea how he felt. Jake was impossible to read. 1 minute, he'd kiss me like he couldn't get enough, and the next, he'd pull back like nothing had happened. Every time I tried to bring it up, I'd chicken out. What if he didn't feel the same? What if I ruined everything? Then one night, it all came crashing down. We were at a friend's party, and Jake was doing his usual social butterfly thing. Chatting, laughing, charming the hell out of everyone in the room. I was across the room, watching him flirt with some girl, and suddenly I felt this sharp, ugly twist in my chest. Jealousy. It hit me like a slap to the face. I wanted to march over there, grab him by the collar, and shout, "He's mine." But he wasn't. Not really. Because we were just friends. Friends who occasionally slept together, but didn't talk about feelings. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the door, hoping the cold night air would calm me down. But before I made it halfway down the street, Jake caught up with me. "Hey," he said, breathless. "Where are you going?" I turned to face him, my heart in my throat. "I can't do this, Jake." He frowned. "Do what?" "This," I said, gesturing between us. "Whatever this is. I thought I could, but I can't." He stared at me for a long moment, and for once, I couldn't read his expression. "Why not?" "Because I'm in love with you, you idiot." The words burst out of me before I could stop them. Jake blinked, stunned. "What?" I shook my head, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. "I love you, Jake, and I know this was supposed to be casual, but I can't pretend anymore. It's killing me." For a moment, he just stood there silent. And in that moment, my worst fear came true. I thought he didn't feel the same. I thought I just ruined everything. But then, finally he spoke. "You think I don't love you?" he asked softly. "God, I've been in love with you since college. I just didn't know how to tell you." My heart stopped. "Wait, what?" Jake gave me that stupid grin again, the one that always made me melt. "Yeah, you're kind of stuck with me, if that's okay." And just like that, all the fear, all the uncertainty, it vanished. Because somehow, against all odds, we'd found our way to each other. It's been 2 months since that night. We're still figuring things out, how to be best friends and something more, but it's good. Better than I ever imagined. And you know what? I think we were always meant to end up here. We just took the scenic route. This one wasn't supposed to mean anything. That was the plan. A simple, fun, no-strings-attached night to shake off a weird week. I had just come out of a situationship that fizzled out in the most anticlimactic way possible, like no closure, no fights, just a ghosting session that left me staring at my phone wondering how I got here. I figured the best way to move on was to get back out there, jump right into the deep end of bad decisions, and remind myself that casual hookups could be empowering. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. So I swiped until I matched with someone who looked like trouble. Exactly what I thought I needed. His name was Ryan. Beard, tattoos, and that I only text in lowercase vibe that practically screamed, "Do not catch feelings." We exchanged some flirty banter for all of 10 minutes before he said, "Drinks tonight?" And I, of course, said yes. The bar he picked was one of those dimly lit places where every cocktail has a pretentious name and costs way too much, but I didn't care. I showed up determined to have fun. No second guessing. No ver anything. Just fun. And at first it was fun. Ryan had this dry, sarcastic sense of humor that made me laugh way more than I expected. We talked about stupid things, worst date stories, the weirdest concerts we'd been to, and why neither of us believed in star signs but still read our horoscopes religiously. After 2 drinks, I was leaning into him, feeling that familiar buzz in my chest and thinking this is exactly what I needed. By the time we left the bar, the night had taken on that surreal, dreamlike quality where nothing seems real except the two of you. We stumbled through the streets, laughing at things that probably weren't that funny, and eventually ended up back at his place. An apartment that was suspiciously tidy for someone with tattoos and commitment issues. We wasted no time. There was no awkward small talk, no hesitation, just the kind of electricity that makes everything else disappear. And for a while it felt amazing. No past, no future, just the present moment, and it was perfect. Or so I thought. The problem hit me out of nowhere, right in the middle of things. 1 second, I was having a great time, and the next, my brain decided to betray me with a single devastating thought. What the hell am I doing here? I tried to push the thought away, but once it was there, it stuck. And suddenly, all the fun drained out of the room like someone pulled a plug. I kept going, hoping the feeling would pass, but instead, it grew louder. This nagging voice in the back of my mind saying, "Is this really who you are now? Is this all you want?" I know, it's not the kind of thing you're supposed to think about during a hookup. But once it hit, there was no coming back. I was there, in this intimate moment, with someone who didn't know me and didn't care to, and all I could think was, I don't want to be here. We finished barely, and I did my best to play it cool, but inside, I felt like I'd just been sucker punched by my own emotions. Ryan rolled over, muttered something about how that was fun, and closed his eyes like we were checking off a to-do list. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't the problem. I was. I got up, mumbled something about needing water, and stood in his kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I stared at the reflection in his microwave and saw someone I barely recognized. Someone who was using casual sex to avoid confronting some uncomfortable truths about herself. I didn't leave right away. That would have felt too dramatic, and besides, I didn't want him to think I was that person, the one who turns a hookup into an existential crisis. So, I stayed the night, lying next to him with my eyes wide open, waiting for morning like it was a finish line. When the sun finally came up, I did what any reasonable person would do. I made my escape, quietly, efficiently, like a ninja who just pulled off a heist. I left a polite, "Thanks, had a great time," text behind and walked out into the early morning light, hoping that once I was outside, the uneasy feeling in my chest would disappear. Spoiler alert, it didn't. As I walked home, I kept replaying the night in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. But the truth was, nothing had gone wrong. Ryan was exactly who he presented himself to be, a fun, attractive guy who wasn't looking for anything serious. He had played his part perfectly. The problem was me. I realized that somewhere along the line, I'd convinced myself that casual sex was the answer to everything. Loneliness, boredom, heartbreak. I told myself it was empowering, that it made me modern and carefree. But the truth was, it only made me feel more disconnected from myself. That morning, I finally admitted what I'd been avoiding for a long time. I didn't want hookups anymore. I wanted connection, real connection. The kind where someone actually sees you, not just your body. I wanted to wake up next to someone and feel at peace, not like I was running from something. So yeah, that night with Ryan didn't just make me rethink casual sex. It made me rethink a lot of things. And while it wasn't the easiest realization to swallow, I'm grateful for it. Because sometimes the hardest thing to admit is that the life you've been living isn't the one you really want. I haven't sworn off hookups entirely. I'm not that dramatic. But I've stopped pretending they're what I need. These days, I'm focusing more on finding things that genuinely fulfill me. Friendships, hobbies, slow mornings with good coffee. And if love shows up along the way, well, I won't run from it. But the next time someone invites me out for a no-strings-attached night of fun, I'll know better than to think it's the answer to whatever's missing inside me. Because here's the thing. Sometimes, the only person you really need to face is yourself. And no amount of tequila or late-night makeouts can fix that. It was supposed to be simple. Stay home between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. to wait for the package. That was it. One day off work, a whole afternoon free, except for the minor inconvenience of waiting for the delivery guy to ring the bell. Easy, right? Except it wasn't. The package wasn't even something exciting. Just a replacement coffee grinder, because my old one gave up the ghost mid-grind last week, leaving me with half-powdered beans and a full-blown existential crisis. I'd paid extra for 2 days shipping, thinking I'd beat the universe at its own game. But now it was day 3, and the delivery status set out for delivery, which translated roughly to will show up whenever it's least convenient for you. By noon, I'd already cycled through every distraction I could think of. I cleaned the kitchen, reorganized the bookshelves by color, which made them harder to find but weirdly satisfying to look at, and even tried meditation. Turns out, it's hard to find inner peace when you're worried about missing a package. At 1:30 p.m., I checked the tracking app for the 7th time. The little map showed a truck icon 6 blocks away, moving in lazy, unpredictable loops like the driver was avoiding me on purpose. I swear it was personal. I sat down on the couch with my phone in hand, ready to pounce the second the doorbell rang. But 5 minutes turned into 10, and 10 turned into 30. The truck on the map didn't move. By 3 p.m., I was spiraling. What if they rang the bell, and I somehow didn't hear it? What if they claimed they rang it, but they didn't? I'd read those horror stories. Delivery drivers sneaking up to the door, slapping on a missed delivery slip, and fleeing before you could catch them. I refused to be one of those people. So I did the only logical thing. I camped out by the front door. Literally, I dragged over a chair, set it down next to the entrance, and parked myself there like I was on a stakeout. Just me, a cup of cold coffee, and a growing sense of resentment. At 4 p.m., I got desperate and opened the app again. It said the same thing, out for delivery. No new updates. I refreshed the page 3 times just to be sure, but nothing changed. It was like the universe was daring me to crack. And crack I did. I opened the door, stuck my head outside, and looked up and down the street like a man awaiting a life or death verdict. Nothing. Just the faint hum of traffic in the distance and the neighbor's cat glaring at me from the sidewalk. That's when I heard it. The faint beep of a delivery truck reversing down the street. My heart leapt. I grabbed my shoes, ready to bolt. But before I could make it out the door, my phone buzzed in my hand. A notification popped up. Attempted delivery. No one home. Please reschedule. I stared at the message, stunned. What do you mean, no one home? I was right here. I hadn't moved. Fueled by equal parts outrage and caffeine withdrawal, I raced outside, scanning the street like a lunatic. And there it was, the delivery truck, 2 houses down, pulling away as if it had committed a hit and run. Hey! I shouted, waving my arms like I was signaling a plane to land. Wait! I'm here! The truck slowed for a moment, as if considering my existence. And then, just as quickly, it rolled on, disappearing around the corner. I stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, stunned and soaking in my defeat. Somewhere down the street, the neighbor's cat let out a low, judgmental meow, as if to say, pathetic. I wanted to scream, or throw something. Instead, I trudged back inside, shut the door a little too hard, and collapsed onto the couch. The app now offered 2 options: reschedule for another day, or pick it up from the depot tomorrow. I stared at the screen, filled with the kind of anger that only bureaucracy can inspire. I texted my friend Taylor, hoping for some sympathy. Delivery driver just ghosted me. I was standing right there, and they said I wasn't home. Taylor responded almost instantly. Classic. They get off on this stuff. Bet he drove by slow just to mess with you. Not helping, I typed back, but I couldn't help smiling. Taylor always had a way of making me feel less crazy about the stupid stuff. She texted again. You want me to come with you to the depot tomorrow? We can make it an adventure. I considered it. The depot was across town, in an industrial wasteland that always smelled like burnt tires and regret. But Taylor had a way of turning even the worst errands into something bearable. Sure, I typed. Pick me up at 10? The next morning, Taylor showed up right on time, blasting terrible pop music from her car and grinning like we were headed to a theme park instead of a logistical nightmare. The depot was just as grim as I remembered. We walked inside, greeted by the fluorescent hum of cheap lighting and the glazed expressions of employees who looked like they hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration. We stood in line for what felt like hours, only for the guy at the counter to say, "We can't find your package. Might still be on the truck." I felt my soul leave my body. Taylor leaned on the counter, flashing the kind of smile that can charm bouncers and baristas alike. "Come on," she said, voice sweet as syrup. "It's got to be here somewhere. We came all this way." The guy sighed like she'd just asked him to donate a kidney, but he shuffled off to check the back room anyway. "Thanks," I whispered to her. She winked. Never underestimate the power of polite persistence. After another 10 minutes, the guy reappeared, dragging a battered box with my name on it. "Here," he muttered, thrusting it at me like it had personally offended him. I took the package with the reverence of someone receiving a lost artifact. "Thanks," I mumbled, but the guy was already waving us away, eager to return to his purgatory. Back in the car, I ripped the box open and pulled out the coffee grinder, holding it up triumphantly. "Victory!" Taylor shouted, raising an imaginary trophy in the air. I laughed, the frustration from the day before melting away. It was ridiculous, really, going through all this for a glorified bean masher. But in that moment, it felt like a win. Taylor glanced at me as she backed out of the parking lot. "So, coffee at your place? I think we earned it." "Absolutely," I said, already picturing the first sip of that perfect, home-ground brew. And as we drove away, the depot fading in the rearview mirror, I realized something. It wasn't really about the coffee grinder. It was about the little things, about making it through life's absurd inconveniences with good company and a bit of humor. Because if you can survive a missed delivery, you can survive just about anything. So there I was, standing on the edge of a cliff, heart pounding, sweat dripping into my eyes, and legs trembling like jelly. No, I wasn't skydiving or trying to escape a pack of wild animals. I was on what was supposed to be a casual hike. One of those easy trails that the internet promised would take a couple of hours and offer beautiful scenic views. The kind where you don't even need hiking boots, just your regular sneakers and maybe a granola bar for good measure. Spoiler, it did not go as planned. It all started when my friend Jake texted me, "Want to hike this trail tomorrow? It's super chill." Now, I should have known better. Jake's definition of super chill is the same as Bear Grylls' idea of a relaxing vacation. But I thought, how bad could it be? A little sunshine, some fresh air. It sounded nice. The next morning, we met at the trailhead. It was a bit more rugged than I'd expected. There were signs everywhere warning hikers to stay on the marked path and avoid wandering off. Jake looked at me, grinning like he was auditioning for an episode of Man vs. Wild. "Don't worry," he said. "I've been here before. We'll be fine." Famous last words. The first part of the hike was easy enough. Just dirt paths winding through the forest, birds chirping, and the occasional squirrel darting across the trail. I started to relax, thinking, hey, this isn't bad at all. I even felt a little smug, like I'd unlocked some secret health hack that hikers swear by. That's when Jake decided we should explore a little. "There's this awesome overlook just off the main trail," he said, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of someone who definitely wasn't considering the possibility of getting lost. "Trust me, it's worth it." I didn't argue. In hindsight, I should have, but in the moment, it sounded like a great idea. I mean, what's the point of nature if you don't go off the beaten path once in a while, right? We veered off the marked trail and started climbing. The terrain got steeper, and the dirt underfoot turned loose and crumbly. My sneakers weren't exactly made for this kind of thing, but Jake kept reassuring me, "Almost there, man." Every 5 minutes, he said it was just a little further. After what felt like forever, we finally reached the top, a rocky outcrop with a jaw-dropping view of the valley below. For a moment, it felt worth it. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the forest, and the wind was cool on my face. I even pulled out my phone to snap a few photos, feeling like an influencer about to post #NatureIsHealing. And then it happened. I took one step back to get a better angle, and the rock beneath my foot gave way. In an instant, I was sliding down the side of the cliff, scrambling for anything to hold on to. My hands clawed at dirt, rocks, tree roots, anything I could grip. I could hear Jake yelling my name, but his voice sounded far away, drowned out by the pounding of my own pulse. Somehow, my hand caught a thick root sticking out from the cliffside. I clung to it like my life depended on it because, well, it did. Below me was a 30-foot drop onto jagged rocks. One wrong move, and I'd be a smear at the bottom of the canyon, the subject of a local news story titled "Reckless Hiker Falls to His Death." Photos found on his phone. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. My arms were already burning from the effort of holding on. Gravity wasn't just pulling me down. It was yanking like some invisible force was determined to send me plummeting. And that's when the scariest thought hit me. I might not make it out of this. Jake's voice cut through the panic. "Don't move. Just stay still." Oh yeah, because I was really in the mood for interpretive dance at that moment. But I knew he was trying to help, so I gritted my teeth and stayed put, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. Jake scrambled down toward me, his face pale. He reached out, but the ground was too unstable for him to get close. "You have to pull yourself up," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one dangling off the edge of death, but there wasn't any other choice. So, with every ounce of strength I had left, I started pulling myself up. My fingers dug into the dirt, and my arms shook like they were made of wet noodles. It felt like it took an eternity, but inch by inch, I hauled myself back to solid ground. Jake grabbed my arm and helped drag me the rest of the way. I lay there on the dirt, gasping for breath, my heart still racing like it was trying to break out of my chest. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. I was too busy thanking every deity I could think of for not turning me into a cautionary tale. When I finally caught my breath, I looked at Jake and said, "Next time, let's stick to the marked trail." He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh people do when they realize they've narrowly escaped disaster. Deal. The walk back down was quiet. Neither of us wanted to admit how close we'd come to disaster, but it was written all over our faces. Every step felt heavier, and every rustle in the bushes made my heart skip a beat. When we finally reached the car, I collapsed into the seat like it was the safest place on earth. That night, I lay awake replaying the moment in my mind. The slip, the fall, the sheer panic of realizing how close I'd come to not making it home. It haunted me for weeks afterward. Every time I saw a photo of a cliff or a hiking trail, my palms would start to sweat. And you know what? I still love hiking, but now I stick to the damn trail. No more exploring, no more shortcuts, and definitely no more trusting Jake's definition of super chill. Because here's the thing, nature doesn't care how adventurous you feel. It doesn't care if you're trying to take the perfect Instagram photo. One wrong step, 1 second of lost focus, and it'll swallow you whole without a second thought. So if you ever find yourself tempted to wander off the trail, just don't. Stick to the path, enjoy the scenery, and save yourself the trouble. Trust me, one close call with gravity is more than enough for a lifetime. Look, in our defense, it wasn't supposed to be a kidnapping. It was supposed to be a simple, harmless prank, a little mischief to close out our senior year. But things got out of hand, fast. Let me start from the beginning. Our school mascot was this giant, goofy-looking eagle named Eddie. Every pep rally, Eddie would prance around in his oversized bird costume, doing awkward TikTok dances while the cheerleaders pretended to tolerate him. The guy inside the suit was some sophomore named Kyle, who was way too into the whole mascot thing. I mean, the kid lived for it. He wore the Eddie costume like it was armor, marching around with the kind of enthusiasm you only see in someone who hasn't yet been crushed by life. Anyway, one day during lunch, my buddy Travis turned to us and said, "What if we borrow Eddie for a bit?" At first, we laughed. I mean, sure, sneaking off with the school mascot was a funny idea, but it felt impossible. There were teachers everywhere. Not to mention Kyle was never more than 3 feet from the costume at any given time. But Travis was serious. He leaned in closer, whispering like he was planning a government heist. "What if we take the costume before the pep rally? No one will know until it's too late." And that's how the dumbest idea in the history of our high school was born. The plan was simple. Travis had intel, which is a fancy way of saying he overheard Kyle bragging that the Eddie costume was kept in the drama room between events. So all we had to do was sneak into the drama room during lunch, grab the costume, and make a run for it. Easy, right? Wrong. We underestimated 2 things. 1, the sheer size of the Eddie costume, and 2, how much Kyle loved being Eddie. Travis and I managed to sneak into the drama room without getting caught, but when we saw the costume up close, our jaws dropped. It wasn't just the eagle head. It was an entire bird suit, complete with foam talons, wings, and a tail that looked like it could double as a parachute. We wrestled the massive thing into a garbage bag, giggling like idiots, and sprinted out of the room. And just as we turned the corner into the hallway, bam, we ran face first into Kyle. Now, any reasonable person would have dropped the bag and come up with an excuse like, "Oops, we found this on the floor, and we're just returning it." But not Travis. Oh no. Travis looked Kyle dead in the eye, said, "Sorry, Kyle," and then shoved him into a janitor's closet. We both froze for a second, staring at each other in disbelief. "Did we just," I whispered, "kidnap Kyle?" Travis grinned. "Yup." And now we run. So, there we were, 2 idiots with a stolen mascot costume, running down the hallway like we'd just robbed a bank. Kyle was banging on the closet door, screaming threats through the tiny slats, but we were too busy laughing to care. We made it out to the parking lot and shoved the Eddie costume into the trunk of Travis's car. I thought that would be the end of it. Stash the costume, return it later, and no one would be the wiser. But no, Travis had other plans. "Let's take Eddie on an adventure," he said, with the kind of mischievous grin that only appears right before someone ruins their future. "Like, what kind of adventure?" I asked, already regretting every life decision that had led me to this moment. Travis shrugged. "I don't know. Let's take him to Taco Bell." So now, instead of doing the smart thing and returning the costume, we were driving through town with the school mascot's severed head sticking out of the back seat like some twisted trophy. I was halfway through questioning every choice I'd ever made when Travis pulled into the Taco Bell drive-thru. The poor girl at the window took one look at the Eddie head and froze. She stammered, "What is that?" Without missing a beat, Travis said, "It's Eddie. He wanted a Baja Blast." To her credit, the girl handled it like a pro. She gave us our drinks, asked no further questions, and probably went home that night wondering if she'd hallucinated the whole thing. But things didn't stop there. No, Travis wasn't done yet. "Let's take Eddie downtown," he said, slurping his soda. "You're insane," I told him. He grinned. "Exactly." We parked the car downtown and decided it would be funny to pose Eddie in random places. Just for laughs. We put the eagle head on a park bench, draped the wings across a statue, and took selfies with the tail hanging out of a trash can. For a while, it was hilarious. Until it wasn't, because as we were setting up the final shot, Eddie's foam talons clutching the parking meter, we heard sirens. And not just one or two. We're talking multiple sirens, all getting louder by the second. Travis," I said, my heart pounding. "Why are there cops?" Travis looked just as confused as I was. "Dude, I have no idea." We stood there, frozen, as two squad cars came screeching to a halt right in front of us. Officers jumped out, hands on their belts, ready to spring into action. "Put the bird down," one of them shouted. "What?" I stammered. "What's going on?" Apparently, and this is the part that still blows my mind, someone had reported us as kidnappers. Remember Kyle? Yeah, well, the janitor found him locked in the closet, and Kyle told everyone we'd kidnapped him and stolen the mascot costume. By the time word spread to the front office, the story had mutated into something ridiculous, involving ransom notes, stolen cars, and an eagle on the loose. The school freaked out and called the cops, who somehow tracked us downtown. And now we were standing there, holding pieces of Eddie the Eagle, while two very confused officers tried to figure out if we were terrorists or just idiots. Spoiler, it was the latter. Long story short, we spent the next 2 hours at the police station explaining the whole situation while our principal sat across from us, rubbing his temples like he wanted to strangle us both. Kyle, of course, milked the whole thing for all it was worth, acting like he'd just escaped from a Colombian prison camp. "They shoved me in a closet," he told everyone. "I thought I was going to die." In the end, we didn't get arrested, thank God, but we did get banned from every future school event, including graduation. And we had to personally apologize to Kyle, who acted like we owed him a lifetime supply of therapy. As for Eddie the Eagle, the school got the costume back, but not before someone posted our Taco Bell photos online. And now every time there's a pep rally, someone in the crowd yells, "Baja Blast." To this day, whenever I see a mascot, I can't help but smile. Because no matter what happens in life, at least I'll always have the memory of the time we kidnapped Eddie the Eagle and got away with it. Mostly. This happened a few years ago, but it still haunts me like a song you can't get out of your head. I was driving for a rideshare service at the time. One of those apps where you pick people up and hope they don't throw up in your back seat. It was my usual gig for extra cash on weekends, and I had learned the ropes pretty quickly. Stay polite, don't engage too much, and always keep the doors locked between trips. Easy, right? Except for that night. That night, I broke all the rules. It was a Friday, and the city was alive with drunk people trying to make it home. I'd already done about a dozen trips by 1 a.m. when I got the request. Pick up in a part of town I didn't love driving through. But hey, money's money. The app said it was Aaron, and he had a 4.9 star rating, so I figured he was probably normal. I pulled up to the pin drop, a sketchy street corner, dimly lit by a single, flickering street lamp. No big deal, though. Weird pickups happen all the time. I stopped the car, threw on my hazards, and checked the app. Aaron confirmed pickup, 2 minutes ETA. I was scrolling through my playlist when the passenger door opened. A man slipped into the back seat without a word. No greeting, no "Hey, I'm Aaron." Just slid right in like he'd done it 1,000 times. Something about him was off. He was wearing a dark hoodie, and the hood was pulled so far over his face that I could barely see his features. His hands were in his pockets, and his body language screamed, "Don't talk to me." Aaron," I asked, glancing at the app just to make sure I had the right ride. He didn't answer, just nodded once, slow and deliberate, like he was giving me permission to drive. My stomach tightened, but I ignored it. Maybe he was just drunk or tired. Not everyone wants to chat with their driver, and that was fine by me. The address he entered was 20 minutes away, down a long, lonely stretch of road leading out of the city. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. The ride started quietly, just the hum of the engine and the occasional ding from my navigation. But after a few minutes, I noticed something strange. He wasn't looking at his phone. In fact, he wasn't doing anything, just sitting there still as a statue, staring straight ahead at the back of my head. No shifting, no fidgeting, nothing. I tried to tell myself it was fine. I mean, what was I going to do? Pull over and tell the guy he was sitting too quietly? But the deeper we drove into the outskirts, the worse the feeling got. The kind of feeling you get when someone is standing right behind you, even though you know you're supposed to be alone. It was about 10 minutes into the drive when I realized what was bothering me the most. He didn't seem drunk or tired. He was aware, too aware. The kind of awareness that puts you on edge, like when you walk into a room and feel someone watching you before you even see them. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. He wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at me. Our eyes met in the mirror for the briefest second, and I swear, I saw a smile, just the slightest twitch at the corners of his mouth, like he knew exactly how uncomfortable he was making me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The road ahead was dark and empty, no other cars in sight. Just miles of black asphalt stretching into the night. The worst part? We were only halfway to his destination. "Long night, huh?" I said, trying to break the silence. My voice came out shaky, even though I forced a smile. He didn't answer, just kept staring at me through the mirror, that faint smile never quite leaving his lips. That's when I noticed something else, something that sent a jolt of cold fear through me. His phone was lying next to him on the seat, screen off. He hadn't touched it once since he got in. If he wasn't using his phone, how had he entered the destination? My heart started racing. I casually glanced at the app again, hoping to find some sort of explanation. But there was nothing, just the route steadily ticking down as we got closer to wherever the hell I was driving him. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to keep my breathing steady. Play it cool, just get him to the address, and this will be over. But then, just as we passed the turnoff to an old gas station, he spoke. "Why didn't you take that road?" His voice was low, almost amused, like he already knew the answer. I stammered, GPS didn't tell me to." Silence. And then, after a long pause, he chuckled softly, just a low, quiet laugh that made my skin crawl. "You should have taken that road," he said, more to himself than to me. That was it. I wasn't waiting to find out what was at the end of this ride. I needed to get this guy out of my car now. I spotted a gas station up ahead, the kind with bright lights and security cameras. Without thinking, I flicked on my turn signal and pulled into the lot. "We need gas," I lied, trying to sound casual. "Won't take long." I expected him to protest, maybe ask what the hell I was doing. But he didn't. He just sat there, that same eerie smile on his face, like he knew something I didn't. I pulled up to the pump and threw the car in a park, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. "I'll be right back," I muttered, yanking the keys from the ignition. The second I stepped out of the car, I sprinted into the gas station, ignoring the confused stares from the cashier. I pulled out my phone and checked the app again, hoping, praying, that I had just made a mistake. But there was no mistake. The app said, "Ride canceled." I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. If the ride had been canceled, then who the hell was sitting in my back seat? I turned toward the car, my breath catching in my throat. The back seat was empty. The door was still shut, the windows rolled up, and the seat belt was lying neatly across the cushion, as if no one had ever sat there. I didn't wait to find out what had just happened. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and tore out of that gas station like my life depended on it. To this day, I don't know who or what got into my car that night. All I know is I never drove for that app again, and sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I still glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that smile waiting for me. The storage unit smelled like dust and stale cardboard, the kind of smell that settles deep into your clothes no matter how fast you try to get out. I stood in the doorway, staring at the rows of boxes stacked against the walls. My name was scribbled on some of them in black marker, slanted, messy handwriting that I recognized as my own from years ago. I hadn't been back here since I packed everything up after Dad died. The unit was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown too big for the version of myself that used to fit in here. Either way, the boxes hadn't moved, not even an inch. They were still exactly where I'd left them, frozen in time like an unfinished thought. Ellie had called me last week, her voice hesitant over the line. "They're going to auction it off if you don't come get your stuff?" I promised her I'd take care of it. And then, like everything else in my life, I put it off until the last possible moment. Now it was Saturday afternoon, and I had until 5 p.m. to decide which parts of my old life were worth keeping. I stepped inside and flipped the light switch, but the bulb overhead buzzed and died, leaving me in a dim, flickering twilight. Great. Just enough light to remind me how much I didn't want to be here. I knelt down and pulled the first box off the stack, dust puffing into the air as I cracked it open. Old yearbooks, some high school journals, a baseball glove I hadn't seen in a decade. I ran my fingers along the leather, soft and cracked from years of neglect, and tried to remember the last time I played catch with anyone. The answer didn't come. I tossed the glove aside and moved to the next box, hoping it would contain something easier to deal with. But it was more of the same, fragments of a life I barely recognized anymore. Photos of people I didn't talk to, ticket stubs from movies I couldn't remember, a stack of postcards from places I'd never gone, still waiting for stamps that would never come. At the bottom of the box, I found an old Polaroid camera, the kind that spat out the picture right after you took it. The color's always a little too bright or a little too blurry. I picked it up, surprised by how heavy it felt in my hands. There was still a strip of film inside, one shot left. I stared at the camera for a moment, then raised it to my eye and snapped a picture of the storage unit, just to see if it still worked. The motor whirred, and the photo slid out with a faint hiss, blank and waiting to develop. I shook it instinctively, the way we used to as kids, even though I knew it didn't actually help. The image slowly faded into view. The boxes, the dim light, the edges of my shoes just visible at the bottom of the frame. I didn't know why I felt so disappointed. It was just a picture. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, and I heard the faint hum of voices, someone else rummaging through their own forgotten past. I sat back on my heels and let out a long breath, the weight of the years pressing down on me all at once. The worst part about going through old things is realizing how little of it matters anymore. I pulled out another box, this one heavier than the rest, and opened it. Inside was a stack of vinyl records, each one wrapped in plastic sleeves that had yellowed with age. Dad's collection. I traced my fingers along the spines. Miles Davis, the Rolling Stones, some jazz album I never liked but Dad swore was genius. I could almost hear him humming along, off-key and too loud, flipping the record over halfway through like it was some kind of sacred ritual. It hit me then, harder than I expected. He wasn't coming back. He never was. And all that was left were these boxes and the ghost of his humming, tucked away in my memories like a song I couldn't quite remember the words to. I sat there for a long time, staring at the records, wondering if I should keep them or let them go. Ellie had asked me once why I still kept so much of Dad's stuff, and I didn't have a good answer. Maybe I thought that if I held on to enough of it, I'd feel closer to him. But the truth was, it didn't work that way. Holding on didn't stop the years from passing. It just made them heavier. I closed the box gently, sealing the records back inside. Maybe Ellie would want them, or maybe not. Either way, I wasn't ready to make that decision today. I stood up, stretching my legs, and glanced at the clock on my phone. 4:17 p.m. I had 43 minutes to finish this. But instead of opening another box, I sat down on the cold concrete floor and stared at the Polaroid I'd taken earlier. The image had darkened completely now, the shadows sinking into every corner, making the storage unit look even smaller than it already was. It occurred to me that no one else would ever see this picture. It wasn't the kind of thing you showed people the way you would with vacation photos or family portraits. It was just a snapshot of a moment no one else would care about. And maybe that was okay. Maybe not everything needed to be remembered. I grabbed a marker from one of the boxes and scrawled, "Let it go," on the edge of the Polaroid. Then I stuck it to the wall with a piece of old tape I found at the bottom of the box. It didn't look like much, but it felt like enough. When I stepped outside, the air was crisp and cool, the rain from earlier finally starting to lift. I closed the storage unit door with a heavy clunk and slipped the keys into my pocket. I'd deal with the rest of it another day. Or maybe I wouldn't. Either way, it was time to leave. As I walked back to my car, The sky stretched out above me, wide and open and endless, like the future had been waiting patiently for me to catch up. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. In the beginning, it was perfect. You know that phase where they bring you coffee in bed, remember little things like how you hate cilantro, and text you sweet things out of nowhere. We had that. It felt easy, comfortable. I thought I'd finally found the person I could build a future with. But the shift started slow. So slow I barely noticed it at first. He'd always been the kind of guy who checked in. Just small things like headed home, see you soon, or what do you want for dinner? But one night, he didn't text me after work. It was weird, but I figured maybe he got stuck in traffic or forgot. It happens, right? Except that forgetting became a pattern. He was suddenly too busy to text, too tired to talk, too distracted to listen. I found myself repeating things more than once, only to watch him zone out halfway through. When I asked if everything was okay, he just said, "Work's been crazy." But it wasn't just that. It was the little things. The way he'd shift away from me in bed, how his phone was always face down, and how he'd leave the room to answer calls. Once I walked in while he was on the phone, and he hung up so fast it felt like he'd been caught doing something illegal. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Work," he said quickly, avoiding eye contact. "It's nothing. Nothing." That word sat heavy in my chest, like a rock I couldn't cough up. The real red flag came a few weeks later. He told me he was going on a weekend trip with some friends, just the guys. "It's been ages since we all hung out," he said, smiling like the idea of being away from me for a few days wasn't weird at all. In the past, I would have believed him without a second thought. But now, the knot in my stomach tightened every time he mentioned the trip. Something wasn't right. Still, I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being paranoid. I mean, he was allowed to hang out with his friends, right? It wasn't like I owned him. But that knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. The day he left, I kissed him goodbye at the door. He gave me the usual "I'll text you when I get there," and then he was gone. He never texted. By Saturday afternoon, I was pacing the apartment, chewing my nails down to stubs. Every time I looked at my phone, my heart dropped a little more. I tried telling myself I was being unreasonable. Maybe his phone died. Maybe they were in the mountains with no service. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Finally, around 9 p.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I opened Instagram and started scrolling through his friends' stories, hoping to see a blurry photo of beers and poker chips. Something to confirm that he really was with the guys. Nothing. Just when I was about to give up, I saw it. A story from a mutual friend. One I hadn't even thought to check. It was just a quick clip, only a few seconds long, showing a group of people at a restaurant. And there, in the corner of the frame, was my boyfriend. He wasn't sitting with the guys. He was sitting with her. I stared at the screen, heart pounding in my chest, as the camera panned across the table. She was leaning into him, her hand resting casually on his arm. He was smiling in that familiar way, the same smile he used to give me. I felt like someone had knocked the air out of my lungs. My hand started to shake, and the phone almost slipped from my grip. I watched the story 3 more times, hoping I'd imagined it. But no, there they were, clear as day, laughing and drinking together. The timestamp on the video said it had been posted 5 hours ago. I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to catch my breath. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the fact that he hadn't even bothered to hide it. He hadn't thought twice about being seen in public with her. He'd acted like I wouldn't notice. Or worse, like I wouldn't care. I stared at the phone in my hand, debating whether to call him. But what was the point? The proof was right there. A confrontation wouldn't change anything. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through his email. I knew his password. It was our anniversary date. He told me once in passing, and I tucked the information away, never thinking I'd need to use it. But now, with my heart racing and my hands trembling, I typed it in, and there it was, the hotel confirmation. 2 nights, 1 king bed, her name listed under guest. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen, numb with disbelief. This was the man I thought I knew, the man I'd built a life with, and here he was booking hotel rooms with another woman while telling me he was on a guy's trip. When he finally texted me, some half-assed sorry, lost track of time, I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was there to say? He came back Sunday evening, acting like everything was normal. He tossed his bag on the floor, kissed me on the cheek, and asked if I wanted to order takeout. I watched him from across the room, marveling at how effortlessly he slipped back into his role as my boyfriend, like the past 48 hours hadn't happened. "Did you have fun?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "It was good to catch up with the guys." I nodded slowly, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. "How's the hotel?" "The one with the king bed." His smile froze. For a split second, his mask slipped, and I saw the panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't give him a chance to explain. "I saw the stories," I said quietly. "I know." He stood there, stunned, as if he couldn't believe I'd figured it out. "It's not what you think." "Don't." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear it." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. I could see the regret in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I grabbed my coat and walked toward the door. "Wait," he called after me, his voice desperate. "Can we talk about this?" I paused, hand on the doorknob. "Talk about what?" I asked, my voice hollow. "The fact that you lied? Or the fact that you didn't even try to hide it?" He had no answer. I walked out, closing the door behind me without looking back. And just like that, it was over. I don't think anyone starts out jaded about love. No one wakes up one day and says, "You know what? I'm done believing in romance." It happens slowly, bit by bit, disappointment by disappointment, until one day you look in the mirror and realize that the hopeful, wide-eyed version of yourself is long gone. That's where I'm at now, sitting somewhere between I don't care anymore and I wish I did. It all started with Dan. I met him the way most people meet these days, on a dating app. I was fresh out of a relationship and told myself I wasn't going to catch feelings. Just a few casual dates to ease back into the game. Keep it light, no pressure. But of course, the heart has a way of ignoring all the rules you try to set for it. Dan was everything you'd hope to find in a sea of weird pickup lines and half-hearted attempts. He was funny, attentive, and didn't disappear for hours between texts. He planned dates, real ones, and showed up on time. It was the kind of effort that makes you stop in your tracks and think, maybe not everyone is a disaster. And after a while, I stopped thinking about anyone else. Dan became the person I wanted to share my day with, the one I'd text good night and good morning without even thinking. The first few months were perfect. He introduced me to his friends, took me to his favorite spots, and even invited me to his sister's birthday party. It felt easy in a way that made me think, okay, this is different. This could be something real. I let myself believe in it. But things started to shift around the 6-month mark. Nothing dramatic, just little things. He stopped texting as often, started canceling plans more frequently. At first, I told myself it was normal. Relationships go through ups and downs, right? People get busy. But deep down, I could feel something slipping. When I brought it up, gently, because God forbid you come off as too needy, he assured me everything was fine. "Just a lot going on at work," he said. "You've got nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe him, so I did. But believing someone isn't the same as feeling secure. And week by week, I felt myself falling into that familiar pattern, anxiously waiting for his texts, overanalyzing every response, wondering if I was doing something wrong. It was exhausting. Then came the night that broke me. We had plans to meet for dinner, just something low-key after a busy week. I was excited to see him, hoping maybe we could reconnect and get back to the way things used to be. I texted him around 6 p.m. to confirm the plans. No response. An hour went by, then 2, then 4. I kept glancing at my phone, telling myself he was probably busy or maybe his phone died. By 11 p.m., I gave up. I changed into pajamas, poured myself a glass of wine, and tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. It wasn't just the fact that he hadn't shown up. It was the way he'd made me feel in those 5 hours, sitting there, waiting like an idiot for someone who didn't have the decency to let me know he wasn't coming. He texted the next morning like nothing had happened. "Sorry, I crashed early last night. Was super tired." No apology. No acknowledgement of the fact that I'd been left hanging. Just a casual excuse that made it clear I wasn't a priority. And that was the moment I realized something important. Dating isn't hard because people are busy or because we all have too many options these days. It's hard because people don't care enough to show up. Not really. They'll give you just enough to keep you around, but not enough to make you feel valued. And it wears you down little by little until you start to wonder if maybe you're asking for too much. The funny thing is, I didn't even confront him. I didn't text back with a snarky response or demand an explanation. I just let it go. Because at some point, you stop fighting for people who wouldn't lift a finger for you. We drifted after that. He stopped making plans, and I stopped trying to make things work. And when the texts eventually stopped altogether, I wasn't even surprised. Just tired. It's strange how quickly hope can turn into exhaustion. I used to think every new connection was a chance to find something meaningful. But now it just feels like waiting for the inevitable disappointment. You meet someone, things go well for a while, and then they fade away just like the last one. I think that's what people don't understand about dating today. It's not the ghosting or the mixed signals that break you. It's the way every failed connection chips away at your ability to believe in something real. It's not just one heartbreak. It's all of them, stacked on top of each other until you can't remember what it felt like to hope for something good. These days, I'm careful with my heart. Maybe too careful. I don't text first. I don't get excited when someone shows interest. And I definitely don't make the mistake of thinking that effort at the beginning means anything long-term. Because if I've learned one thing, it's this: people will show you who they are eventually. The trick is believing them the first time. So no, I'm not out there looking for love anymore. I'm not waiting for someone to sweep me off my feet or prove me wrong about all the things I've come to believe. If someone shows up and makes an effort, great. But if they don't, that's fine too. I used to think love was something you had to fight for. That if you just tried hard enough, you'd find someone worth the effort. But now I think love is about finding someone who makes the fight feel easy. And until I meet that person, I'm okay on my own. Because honestly, being alone is a hell of a lot better than sitting across from someone who makes you feel invisible. About 2 years ago, I went hiking alone in a national park just outside of Denver. I know, hiking alone isn't exactly smart, but I'd done it dozens of times before. I like the solitude, the break from city life. I always stuck to marked trails, brought extra water, and shared my location with friends before heading out. It was my thing. Some people meditate, I hike. It's never been a problem. Until that day, I'd planned to take a popular loop trail. Around 8 miles, nothing too intense. It was a beautiful fall day, crisp air, golden leaves everywhere, the kind of scenery that makes you feel small in a good way. I started out around noon, figuring I'd be back by sunset. The first few miles were perfect, just me and nature, no distractions. I only passed a couple of other hikers on their way back. Older folks, friendly enough, giving me a nod and a smile as we crossed paths. Other than that, it was just me, the trail, and the trees. I made it to the halfway point, a little clearing with a great view of the valley below. I stopped to take a break, sat down on a rock, and ate a granola bar while I soaked it all in. That's when I first noticed the silence. Now, anyone who's spent time in the woods knows it's never completely silent. There's always some background noise, birds chirping, wind rustling leaves, the occasional squirrel scampering across the ground. But this was different. The forest felt dead. No wind, no animals, not even the hum of distant traffic. Just nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the world. I brushed it off at first, assuming it was just one of those weird atmospheric things. But as I sat there, the silence started to feel wrong, oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stood up, brushed off my hands, and decided it was time to head back. I figured I'd just gotten too deep into my own head. Too much time alone can do that to you, right? I threw on my backpack and started back down the trail, picking up the pace a little, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. About 15 minutes later, I noticed something strange. I was passing by a large fallen tree, and sitting on top of it was a small pile of stones. Now, that might not sound weird. People stack rocks all the time when they hike, either to mark trails or just for fun. But what made me stop was the fact that I'd already passed this exact tree on my way up the trail, and the stones hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. My heart gave a little jump, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe I just missed it earlier. Or maybe another hiker had passed by while I was taking my break and stacked the stones. That was possible, right? I kept walking, but the sense of unease grew stronger. Every few minutes, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me. But the trail was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, like there were eyes on me just out of sight. Watching, waiting. Then I heard it, a snap like a twig breaking underfoot. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened, my pulse pounding in my ears. At first, there was nothing, just the same suffocating silence. But then faintly I heard it again, another snap closer this time. Someone was out there. I swung my head around, scanning the forest. But all I saw were trees, tall, ancient pines stretching toward the sky, their shadows long and dark in the fading light. I stood there, heart racing, straining to hear anything else. But after a few seconds, the noise stopped. Everything was still again. Too still. That's when I knew. Whoever or whatever was following me wasn't trying to be seen. They were hunting. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I turned and started walking faster, my feet crunching against the gravel trail. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to move, to get the hell out of there. I picked up the pace, my breath coming in short bursts, eyes flicking to every shadow, every movement in the corner of my vision. About 10 minutes later, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Another pile of stones, stacked neatly on a tree stump just ahead of me. This time, I knew for sure it hadn't been there before. Panic surged through me like cold water. I started running, my backpack thumping against my shoulders with every step. I wasn't even sure where I was going, just knew I had to get out now. The trail twisted and turned through the forest, and every time I rounded a bend, I half expected to see someone standing in the middle of the path, waiting for me. And then I did. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but no, there was a man standing on the trail about 50 yards ahead. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, his face partially hidden under a hood. I skidded to a stop, heart hammering in my chest, and stared at him. He didn't move, just stood there, perfectly still, like he'd been waiting for me. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The man tilted his head slightly, as if curious. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into the woods, disappearing between the trees. That's when I realized something horrifying. There were no side trails where he had stood. He hadn't taken a shortcut. He just vanished. I didn't think. I ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, legs burning, lungs on fire. The forest blurred around me, the trail a narrow ribbon beneath my feet. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't care where the trail led. Just kept running, fueled by pure animal fear. After what felt like an eternity, I burst out of the trees and into the parking lot of the trailhead. My car was the only one there. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the door. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and sat there, gasping for breath, heart hammering in my chest. I stared at the tree line, half expecting to see the man step out of the woods, that same curious tilt to his head. But the forest stayed silent. Empty. I didn't wait around to see if he'd follow. I started the car, tires screeching as I tore out of the parking lot. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, the forest far behind me. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. But I know this. If I hadn't listened to that feeling in my gut, if I hadn't run when I did, I might not be here to tell this story. So, here's how it all started. I was 2 glasses of wine deep, sitting at the bar scrolling through my phone like it held the answers to my life problems, when this guy slides into the seat next to me and says, "Bad night, or are you just avoiding everyone?" Now, normally, I'd brush off a line like that. But something about the way he said it, casual, a little curious, and not the least bit pushy, made me put my phone down. I looked at him, and let me tell you, he was annoyingly handsome in that I just woke up like this kind of way. Tousled brown hair, a slightly wrinkled shirt, and a smirk that promised trouble. I remember thinking, why not? My night was already circling the drain, and maybe a little flirtation would pull it out of its nosedive. His name was Alex, and within minutes, I was laughing like we were old friends. It was effortless. One of those rare conversations where you don't have to try. He wasn't laying it on too thick, but he also wasn't pretending not to flirt. It was just the right amount of charm with a dash of self-deprecating humor. Before I knew it, the bartender was giving us the last call signal, and I wasn't ready for the night to end. And neither was he. "Your place or mine?" he asked so matter-of-factly that I actually laughed. No pretense, no beating around the bush. Just straight to the point. And here's the thing, I could have said no. I could have been sensible, gone home, and binge-watched another show I'd forget about by morning. But I didn't. I leaned into the chaos instead. We ended up at his apartment, a loft with mismatched furniture and an absurd number of plants. "They're not mine," he said when he caught me eyeing the mini jungle in the corner. "They came with the roommate." Somehow, that made me like him more. What followed was exactly what you'd expect. Clothes everywhere, bad decisions, good chemistry. It was fun, no weirdness, no awkward moments, just two people having a great time with no obligations attached. Or at least, that's what I thought. Then morning came, and everything went sideways. I woke up to find him sitting at the edge of the bed, staring out the window like he was auditioning for a melancholy indie film. His back was turned to me, and for a second I thought, oh no, this guy has feelings. Which was hilarious, considering the fact that I had spent the entire night convincing myself I could do casual without catching feelings. "You okay?" I asked, already regretting it. I mean, the golden rule of hookups is no emotional follow-ups. But the words were out before I could stop them. He turned around, gave me a sheepish smile, and said, "Do you ever feel like, I don't know, like maybe none of this really matters?" And just like that, I was trapped in an impromptu therapy session I had not signed up for. I blinked. "You mean this? Like, the hookup?" "No, not this specifically," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Just everything. You know? Life, work, relationships." I wanted to laugh, but the look on his face told me he was dead serious. Here I was thinking I was in for a carefree night, and instead, I'd landed in the middle of some guy's existential crisis. What was I supposed to say? "Nope, I'm emotionally well-adjusted. Thanks for asking?" Of course not. Instead, I did the stupidest thing imaginable. I joined him. "Honestly? Yeah," I said. "I mean, what are we even doing half the time? Like, what's the point of any of it?" And that, dear reader, was the moment the hookup stopped being a hookup and turned into a full-blown existential spiral. We sat there, two near strangers, dissecting our lives like amateur philosophers at 8 a.m. We talked about everything: our careers, our parents, our failed relationships, even the meaning of happiness or lack thereof. It was ridiculous and profound at the same time. At one point, he turned to me and said, "Do you think we keep doing this, hooking up with strangers because we're all just scared of being alone?" And boom, there it was. The question I'd been avoiding for months, now laid bare by a guy I just met 12 hours ago. I didn't have an answer. Or, rather, I had too many answers and none of them felt right. I guess, maybe, I muttered, staring down at my hands like they held some kind of clue. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, he smiled and said, "You want pancakes?" I blinked. "What?" "Pancakes," he repeated. "I make really good ones. I have blueberries and everything." I should have said no. I knew that. Pancakes are emotional. Pancakes imply something, but instead I found myself nodding. So, we made pancakes, and as we stood in his tiny kitchen, flipping batter and stealing blueberries out of the bowl, I realized something. I liked this. Not just the pancakes, but the whole thing. The conversation, the vulnerability, the weird, unexpected connection. It wasn't what I'd signed up for, but it felt good. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't cut out for casual sex after all. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because I couldn't do it without wanting more. More conversation, more connection, more something. I didn't stay much longer after breakfast. We hugged goodbye. An actual, real hug. And I left his apartment feeling more confused than ever. Not because I regretted the night, but because it made me realize something I wasn't ready to admit. I don't want to be the person who floats through life, collecting moments without meaning. I want something real, even if I don't know what that looks like yet. I haven't seen Alex since. We didn't exchange numbers or make vague promises to hang out sometime. But that night, and the pancakes stayed with me. It was a reminder that hookups aren't inherently good or bad. They're just moments, and sometimes those moments make you confront things you've been running from. So, what did I learn? I learned that maybe it's okay to want more. And maybe the scariest thing isn't hooking up with a stranger. It's admitting to yourself that you're ready for something deeper. Next time though, no pancakes. Too much emotional baggage in breakfast food. Here's the thing. When you've been friends with someone for as long as I've been friends with Mia, you think you know every possible way your relationship could unfold. We've been close since high school. She was the one who helped me survive my first breakup, taught me how to sneak out of my parents' house, and made me laugh on the worst days. Over the years, people always assumed we were a thing, but we weren't. There were no sparks, no underlying tension. At least none I was aware of. Mia was just Mia, my best friend, my ride or die. She knew what I looked like on 3 hours of sleep, knew my coffee order, and even met all the terrible exes I collected over the years. She was the one person who'd always been there. But then there was that night. It was after my birthday party, a low-key thing with just a few friends, drinks, and loud music in my apartment. Mia stayed to help me clean up after everyone left. That's who she was, always the last one to leave, always making sure I was okay. We were tipsy, laughing about something stupid that happened earlier, when Mia found an unopened bottle of tequila on my kitchen counter. "Shots?" she asked, wiggling her eyebrows. It sounded like a great idea at the time. So we sat on the floor of my living room, passing the bottle back and forth, talking about everything and nothing. Somewhere in the middle of it, Mia asked, "How come we never dated?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" She shrugged, her head tilted to the side in that way she always did when she was overthinking. "I mean, don't you think it's weird? We've been best friends for years, and we've never even tried." I laughed it off. "Because we're smart, that's why." But Mia didn't laugh. She just looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time, I noticed the way her eyes softened when they met mine. "You ever wonder what it'd be like?" she asked, her voice quieter now. And just like that, the air between us changed. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My brain was screaming, "This is a bad idea. This is a very bad idea." But before I could stop myself, I leaned in, and then somehow we were kissing. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It was soft, careful, like we were testing the waters, waiting to see if this was real. And God, it felt so right. Like coming home after a long, exhausting day. We didn't stop. One kiss turned into two, and two turned into us stumbling into my bedroom, clothes hitting the floor in a messy trail. It was everything it shouldn't have been. Too easy, too comfortable, too perfect. And the craziest part? It didn't feel weird. It felt inevitable, like we'd been heading toward this moment all along without even realizing it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window and the smell of Mia's perfume lingering in the sheets. For a moment, everything felt peaceful, until I rolled over and saw her lying beside me, still asleep. And that's when the panic hit. Oh God, what did we do? I stared at the ceiling, my heart racing. This wasn't some random hookup. This was Mia, my best friend, the one person I couldn't afford to lose. I kept telling myself it was fine, that we'd laugh about it later, that nothing had to change. But deep down, I knew things were already different. When Mia finally woke up, she gave me a sleepy smile, completely unfazed. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey." I whispered back, my throat dry. And just like that, we slipped back into our usual rhythm. Coffee, breakfast, bad jokes. It was like nothing had happened. Except it had, and neither of us was ready to talk about it. We didn't stop after that night. For weeks, we kept falling into each other, late-night hookups that felt too intimate to be casual, but too undefined to be anything more. It was addicting and confusing, like trying to navigate a maze without a map. Every kiss, every touch made me want more, but every time I tried to bring it up, the words got stuck in my throat. Mia seemed fine with it, unbothered, like this was just another chapter in our friendship. But for me, it was getting harder and harder to separate my feelings. I found myself thinking about her all the time, wondering if she ever thought about us the way I did. But I was too scared to ask. What if this was just a fling for her? What if I told her how I felt and ruined everything? Things came to a head one night when Mia showed up at my place, visibly upset. She'd had a fight with her sister, and without saying a word, she collapsed onto my couch, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her close, whispering that it was going to be okay. And before I knew it, she was kissing me again, desperate, like she was trying to drown her emotions in me. This time, I couldn't hold back. I kissed her like I meant it, like I'd been waiting for this my whole life. And in that moment, I knew I was in love with her. Completely, stupidly, hopelessly in love. Afterward, we lay there in the dark, our bodies tangled together, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Mia, I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. What are we doing? She was quiet for a moment, her hand tracing lazy circles on my arm. I don't know, she admitted, but I don't want it to stop. Neither did I. But things weren't that simple. The next few weeks were a blur of mixed signals and unspoken feelings. We kept sleeping together, but the emotional weight of it all started to catch up to me. Every time I saw her, I wanted to tell her how I felt, but fear held me back. What if she didn't feel the same? What if I lost her altogether? It finally came to a breaking point one night when I saw Mia at a party, talking to another guy. I knew I had no right to be jealous. We weren't official, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. I left without saying goodbye, but Mia followed me outside. What's going on with you? She demanded, her eyes sharp with frustration. I can't do this anymore, I blurted out. I can't keep pretending this is nothing. I love you, Mia. I've been in love with you for a long time. She stared at me, stunned. For a moment, I thought I'd ruined everything. But then she smiled, soft, a little sad, but hopeful. I love you too, she whispered. And just like that, everything made sense. It's been 4 months since that night, and we're still figuring things out. Some days it's easy. Other days, it's messy and complicated. But it's real. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of what comes next. Because no matter what, I know we'll figure it out. Together. I used to think drowning only happened to people who couldn't swim. You know, kids who wander into the deep end without floaties or unlucky surfers caught in a monster wave. Not people like me, a grown adult with a decent backstroke. But trust me, when water decides it wants you, it doesn't matter how good you think you are. And I learned that lesson the hard way. It was summer, blazing hot, and the city pool was packed. I wasn't even planning on going that day, but my buddy Mike convinced me. Come on, he said. Just a quick dip. It'll cool you off. I wasn't in the mood to deal with screaming kids and lifeguards blowing whistles every 5 minutes, but the heat was brutal. So, I figured, what's the harm? A quick swim, splash around for a bit, and then back home to binge watch Netflix. Easy. When we got to the pool, it was the usual chaos. Kids cannonballing off the diving board, parents chasing toddlers with sunscreen bottles, and the lifeguard squinting into the sun like someone who definitely wasn't getting paid enough. Mike jumped straight in with the grace of a water buffalo, sending a tidal wave over some poor family nearby. I rolled my eyes and waded in slowly, letting the cool water creep up my legs. Now here's where things started to go sideways. There was this shallow end where the water only came up to your waist. Perfect, right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong in 3 feet of water? I wandered over, standing just under the shade of the lifeguard tower, and let myself sink down until I was sitting on the pool floor, shoulders barely submerged. It was peaceful for a moment, the sun filtering through the water, everything muffled and slow. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let myself float, completely relaxed. That's when Mike, the idiot, thought it would be hilarious to mess with me. Without warning, he grabbed my shoulders and pushed me under. Not hard, just a quick dunk. A prank. No big deal, right? Except that one playful push threw off my balance completely. I panicked, arms flailing as I tried to right myself, but somehow my feet slipped on the smooth tiles. I couldn't get any traction, and my head stayed under. Now, here's the thing. When you're underwater, even shallow water, the panic comes fast. My brain knew it was only 3 feet deep. To stand up, idiot? But my body? Oh, it had other plans. Everything tensed up. My lungs burned. I kicked wildly, trying to push off the pool floor, but my foot kept slipping like I was on ice. Meanwhile, Mike thought it was all part of the joke. He was standing right there, laughing, probably thinking I was putting on a show. I could hear him through the water, that distorted, bubbly laughter, and I wanted to scream, "Help me, you moron!" But screaming underwater isn't exactly effective. I thrashed harder, heart pounding as the seconds stretched out. I could feel my strength draining fast. Every instinct screamed, "Get to the surface. Breathe." But no matter how hard I pushed or twisted, I couldn't get my feet under me. It was like the pool had me in a choke hold, and all I could do was struggle. At some point, maybe 10 seconds in, maybe longer, I realized just how bad things were getting. My arms felt heavy, and my kicks were slowing down. I was out of air, and that terrifying thought hit me. This is it. I'm not going to make it. I imagined the lifeguard blowing her whistle too late, kids staring in horror as they fished me out of the shallow end, parents whispering, "How did he drown?" It's only 3 feet of water, and that's the thing that scared me the most, not the thought of dying, but the absurdity of it. People would laugh about it later, right? He drowned in the kiddie pool? How does that even happen? I felt myself fading, my limbs going limp, and just when I thought I was done for, Mike grabbed my arm and yanked me up. I gasped so hard it felt like my lungs would explode. Water poured out of my nose, and I coughed so hard I thought I'd hack up a lung. For a second, I just stood there, hunched over, wheezing, water dripping off me, too stunned to speak. Mike stared at me, his grin fading fast when he saw the look on my face. "Dude, are you okay?" I wanted to punch him. I wanted to curse him out, scream at him for being an idiot. But all I could do was collapse against the side of the pool, still trying to catch my breath. It took me a solid minute before I could even form a sentence. "I almost drowned, you moron." I finally managed to choke out. Mike's eyes went wide. "In 3 feet of water?" "Yes." I glared at him, my chest still heaving. "It happens, okay? It freaking happens." He stammered an apology, looking genuinely freaked out. And to be fair, he didn't know. None of us knew how easy it was for things to go wrong in an instant. But that's the thing about water. It doesn't care if you're a strong swimmer or if you're in the deep end or not. The second you lose control, it'll take you just the same. For the rest of the day, I stuck to the edge of the pool like a toddler clinging to their floaties. I didn't care if I looked ridiculous. Better to look stupid than end up dead. Mike kept apologizing every 5 minutes, but I just waved him off. I wasn't mad. Not really. I was too busy being grateful to still be breathing. To this day, I get weirdly nervous around water, even if it's just a shallow pool. I still swim, but now I take it seriously. No more pranks, no more games. I don't care if it's 3 feet or 30. Water deserves respect. Because drowning doesn't care how deep the pool is. It only takes a second. And the next time someone says, "Oh, you can't drown in shallow water," I just smile and think, "Buddy, you have no idea." I found the letter while cleaning out the coat closet. It was tucked inside the pocket of an old denim jacket, folded so tightly it felt like it had been waiting there, hidden on purpose. At first, I didn't recognize the handwriting. Slanted and sharp, the ink faded along the creases. But then it hit me, and I felt my stomach flip. It was from Emma. I sat down on the floor, jacket still in my lap, and stared at the envelope for what felt like forever. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since the night everything fell apart. I figured she was gone for good, scattered across some new life where I didn't exist anymore. But here she was, folded into the pocket of an old jacket, waiting to be found. The letter was dated 3 years ago. 3 years. She must have left it during one of those last nights together, when things were already coming undone, but we were both pretending they weren't. I should have known better. Emma was always the kind of person who left things unfinished, scattering pieces of herself wherever she went. I could still hear her voice in my head as I unfolded the letter, sharp and teasing. What's the point of saying goodbye when you know it doesn't stick? The paper crackled as I smoothed it out across my knee. The words inside were short, handwritten in her messy scrawl. "For whenever you find this, just know it wasn't all for nothing." I read it again, slower this time. 5 words and a name at the bottom, Emma. That was it. No grand explanation, no apology. Just a small, cryptic note from someone who had slipped through my life like smoke through a crack in the window. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. The night Emma left, it wasn't dramatic. No screaming match, no slamming doors, just a quiet, heavy kind of goodbye. She stood at the edge of the apartment, her suitcase by the door, while I sat on the couch pretending I didn't care. "This isn't working," she had said, her voice tired and far away. I nodded, even though I didn't know what she wanted me to say. She was right, it wasn't working, but that didn't make it easier to let her go. "I'll see you around," she'd said softly, as if we might bump into each other at the grocery store someday, and pick up right where we left off. She kissed my cheek one last time, and then she was gone. And just like that, she became one more thing I never quite finished. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the pocket of the denim jacket. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, just tossing the whole jacket in the donation bin and letting it become someone else's problem. But something stopped me. The truth was I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to track her down, demand answers. Well, it wasn't for nothing, Emma. What did I miss? But the other part of me, the part that had spent the past 3 years learning how to live without her, knew that wouldn't change anything. The past was the past. Emma was gone, and whatever she meant by those words, they weren't for me to understand anymore. I hung the jacket back up in the closet, closing the door gently, as if sealing away something fragile. Maybe that's where it belonged, tucked away in the dark, left to gather dust with the rest of the things I'd outgrown. The next morning, I went to the cafe down the street, the one Emma and I used to go to on Sundays. It was still the same chalkboard menu, same crooked chairs, same barista with a pierced eyebrow who never smiled. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window, watching the world outside move along without me. I wondered if Emma ever came back here, if she sat in this same spot, sipping coffee from the same chipped mugs, thinking about all the things we never said. Probably not. Emma wasn't the kind of person who looked back. The coffee was bitter and too hot, but I drank it anyway, letting the warmth settle in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt still, like I wasn't running anymore. I stayed there for a while, watching strangers come and go, the city unfolding around me in quiet rhythms I hadn't noticed in years. I thought about Emma, about the letter, about all the unfinished things we leave behind without meaning to. It wasn't all for nothing. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's the best anyone can hope for. Not closure, but just enough meaning to make the rest of it bearable. And maybe that was enough. Later that day, I went back to the apartment and pulled the denim jacket from the closet. It smelled faintly of dust and something older, something I couldn't quite place. I didn't put it on. I just held it for a moment, fingers tracing the seams, feeling the weight of everything it carried. Then, without really thinking about it, I slipped the letter back into the pocket and zipped it shut. Not as a way of forgetting, but as a way of keeping it. Because some things aren't meant to be understood. Some things are just meant to stay with you, folded quietly in the corners of your life, waiting to be found when you need them most. I hung the jacket by the door this time, where I could see it on my way out. Then I grabbed my keys and went outside, the afternoon sun warm on my face, the sound of the city rising around me like an old, familiar song. And for the first time in years, I felt okay. Not great, not healed, just okay. And maybe, for now, that was enough. This happened about 7 years ago when I was staying with my cousin Mia in her small hometown. She lived in one of those places where everyone knows each other, and the biggest drama usually involved whose dog got loose or who was cheating on their spouse. Not exactly the kind of place where you'd expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. That made what happened that night even more unsettling. Mia had just bought her first house, an old, 2-story place on the edge of town that backed up against a dense patch of woods. She'd invited me to stay over for the weekend to help her unpack and set up furniture, so I drove down after work, figuring it would be a fun, relaxing trip. The house was cozy but old. Creaky floors, drafty windows, and a staircase that groaned like it had seen too many footsteps. It had character, she called it. I called it creepy, but I didn't want to kill her vibe. We spent most of the first day setting things up, laughing over pizza and wine. By the time night rolled around, we were both exhausted. Mia's room was set up on the second floor, but the guest room I was supposed to sleep in was still full of boxes, so we decided I'd crash on the couch downstairs. "I hope you don't mind the woods," Mia said, grinning as she helped set up a blanket for me on the couch. "They can be kind of creepy at night, but hey, At least you'll get the full small town experience. I laughed it off, but I'd be lying if I said the woods didn't put me a little on edge. They pressed right up against the back of the house, dark and thick, with branches that seemed to claw at the windows. Still, it was a quiet night. Nothing to worry about, or so I thought. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of tapping. It was soft, rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers against glass. I blinked, groggy and confused, and for a second I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Just faint enough that I wasn't sure if it was real or a leftover dream. I sat up on the couch, heart thudding in my chest, and glanced around the living room. Everything looked normal. The windows were dark, the house silent. I figured it must have been some tree branch brushing against the window. Nothing weird, but just as I was about to lie back down, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was louder, more deliberate. I turned toward the large window at the far end of the room, and that's when I saw it. Just a shadow at first, barely visible against the darkness outside. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized what I was seeing. There was a man standing just outside the window. He was pressed up against the glass, his face almost touching it, his breath fogging the surface. He didn't move, just stared into the living room, his eyes wide and unblinking. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. But then the man raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and tapped on the window again. Tap, 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 like he knew I was watching. I scrambled off the couch, panic surging through me, and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. I tried to call Mia, but she didn't pick up, probably passed out upstairs with her phone on silent. I felt completely alone, trapped. The man outside tilted his head, as if he were curious, and smiled. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl, too wide, too eager, like he was enjoying himself. And then, just as slowly as he had appeared, he stepped back into the darkness, vanishing into the woods. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I wanted to believe he was gone, but something told me he wasn't. Something told me he was still out there, watching, waiting. I locked the front door, double-checked the windows, and turned off all the lights in the house. The darkness made it worse. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak of the old floorboards sent my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just some local messing around, maybe a drunk guy who got lost on his way home. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was something off about him, something that didn't feel human. Just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. But this time, it wasn't coming from the living room window. It was coming from the back door. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The back door was in the kitchen, just around the corner from where I stood. I hadn't locked it. I'd completely forgotten to lock it. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body refused to listen. The tapping continued, slow, steady, relentless, and then I heard the doorknob rattle. That snapped me out of it. I bolted toward the kitchen, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a heavy ceramic vase from the coffee table, and held it in front of me like a weapon. The doorknob twisted again, and the door creaked open an inch, just enough for me to see the man's hand, pale and dirty, gripping the edge. I didn't think. I just slammed the door shut as hard as I could, throwing the deadbolt into place with trembling hands. For a moment, everything was silent. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for the next tap, the next rattle of the doorknob. But it never came. The night stayed quiet. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with the vase in my lap, staring at the windows, waiting for the man to come back. But he never did. The next morning, I told Mia what had happened. She laughed it off, saying it was probably just some drunk guy from town, or maybe a deer tapping at the glass. But I knew what I saw. I knew it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't just some harmless prank. Before I left, I took one last look at the woods behind her house. The trees stood silent, swaying gently in the morning breeze. But I could feel it, that same heavy presence lingering just out of sight. I haven't been back to Mia's house since. And to this day, I can still hear that sound in my head whenever I close my eyes. It was almost midnight when my phone started buzzing. I stared at the screen, squinting through the haze of half-sleep, and saw the name, Dad. Now, my dad doesn't call me for small talk. He's not one of those just checking in kind of dads. If he calls after 9 p.m., it's either bad news or he needs me to explain, for the 10th time, how to restart the Wi-Fi. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button, heart thudding just a little faster. Midnight calls are never good. I answered, bracing myself. Hello. Hey, kiddo, Dad said, his voice a little too bright. You busy? I glanced at the clock. It's midnight, Dad. All right. Sorry about that. He sounded sheepish, which was unusual. My dad doesn't do sheepish. I needed to ask you something. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. Everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine, he said too quickly. Then he paused, like he wasn't sure how to get to the point. Dad, he cleared his throat. You remember that old box of Mom's stuff? The one I kept in the garage. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly what box he was talking about. Mom's memory box, she called it, filled with photos, ticket stubs, birthday cards, and all the little pieces of her life that she hadn't wanted to throw away. She'd always said it was for someday, when we'd all sit together and go through it. But someday never came. She passed away 2 years ago, and the box stayed in the garage, gathering dust. Dad couldn't bring himself to open it, and honestly, neither could I. Yeah, I said carefully. What about it? Well, he trailed off, and I could hear him shifting around like he was pacing. I was thinking about looking through it tonight. Thought maybe you'd want to, do it together. I blinked. Over the phone? Yeah. He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that doesn't quite reach the heart. Figured it might be easier that way. No pressure or anything. Just thought you might want to. I sat there for a moment, stunned. This was not the conversation I expected to have at midnight on a Tuesday. But there was something in his voice, something tentative, almost vulnerable. And it hit me, this wasn't really about the box. It was about him trying to find a way to connect without saying that's what he needed. Okay, I said softly. Let's do it. I could hear the relief in his voice. All right, give me a second to grab it. There was some rustling on his end, papers shifting, a soft grunt as he moved something heavy, and then he was back. Got it. I lay back on my pillow, pulling the blanket tighter around me. What's the first thing in there? Let's see. More rustling. Oh, a postcard from Paris. That's right. She went there with her friend. What was her name? Susan? No, Sally. He chuckled. Your mom always said she wanted to take me there someday, but we never got around to it. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. She used to tell me the Eiffel Tower was overrated. She did. Dad laughed, and for the first time, it sounded real. She said it looked better in movies. He kept going, pulling out random things, a ticket stub from a concert. She dragged him to a faded Polaroid of the two of them at some beach I didn't recognize. Each item came with a memory, some small story I'd never heard before. And with every story, I felt her presence, as if she was sitting right there with us, laughing along. Then there was a long pause. I could hear Dad breathing on the other end, the sound heavy and uneven. Dad, I whispered. Yeah, I'm here, he said, his voice thick. I found one of your old drawings. That caught me off guard. My drawing? Yeah, it's a crayon picture. You must have been, 5? It's of the three of us. He chuckled, but there was a crack in his voice. You drew us holding hands. I've got no hair, of course. I knew exactly which picture he was talking about. I could see it in my mind. Mom framed it and put it on the fridge, where it stayed for years until it disappeared one day, swallowed by the clutter of life. I didn't know she'd kept it. She must have really loved that drawing, Dad said quietly. I swallowed hard. Yeah, we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her absence hanging between us, heavy but somehow comforting. There's one more thing, Dad said finally, his voice soft. It's a card. For you. My heart skipped a beat. For me? Yeah. Looks like she wrote it a few months before she passed. He hesitated. Do you want me to read it? I nodded, even though he couldn't see. Yeah, please. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was rough but steady. Dear Matt, if you're reading this, it means I'm not around to nag you anymore. I know life isn't always easy, and I know you tend to keep things bottled up. But I need you to remember one thing. You're not alone. No matter where life takes you, no matter how hard things get, you've got people who love you. And I'm still with you too. I'll always be with you. Love, Mom. I closed my eyes, letting the tears come. I didn't try to stop them. There was something healing in the release, in hearing her words after all this time. Thanks, Dad. I whispered, my throat tight. Yeah, he said softly. I thought you want to hear it. We sat there in silence again, but this time, it felt different, less heavy, more full. Like we both found something we didn't know we were looking for. Maybe we should do this again sometime, Dad said quietly. Go through more of the box. I smiled through the tears. Yeah, I'd like that. We said our goodnights. And when I hung up, the room felt a little warmer, a little brighter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like things would be okay. Maybe not perfect, but okay. And that was enough. The first time I noticed something was off, I didn't think much of it. Houses make weird noises, creaks, pops, the occasional thud. I had just moved into this old rental house, a cute little place at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It wasn't perfect, some flaky paint, old floors that squeaked, and a weird draft in the living room. But the rent was cheap, and it had a cozy vibe. It felt like the kind of place I could settle into. It started the second night I was there. I was unpacking boxes in the living room when I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from inside the walls. Not the kind of casual noise you brush off, either. It was distinct, like claws scraping against wood. Great, I muttered to myself. Rats. Of course, the landlord had assured me there weren't any pests. But what else could it be? I made a mental note to call an exterminator and went back to unpacking. The noise didn't stop. It came every night, always starting around 10 p.m., right when I was trying to relax. At first, it was just a few scratches here and there, manageable. But within a week, it got worse. The scratching became more frantic, like whatever was inside the walls was desperate to get out. I told myself it was just a raccoon or some other animal that had gotten trapped, but something about the sound didn't sit right with me. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded deliberate. One night, after a particularly bad round of scratching, I finally snapped. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to inspect the house. I circled the exterior, looking for any signs of holes or cracks where something could have gotten in. But the house was solid. No gaps, no openings. Nothing. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I brushed it off. Maybe it's just the pipes, I told myself. Old houses do weird things. I was ready to let it go, until the whispering started. It happened a few nights later. I had just turned off the lights and was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was my imagination, just that weird in-between state where dreams bleed into reality. But then it came again, soft and low, like someone speaking right next to my ear. Let me out. I bolted upright, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The room was dark and silent, but I could feel something, an oppressive presence, like the air itself had grown heavier. I sat there for what felt like hours, every nerve on edge, waiting for the whisper to come again. But it didn't. I told myself it had just been a dream. Maybe I was stressed from the move. Maybe I needed to sleep more. But deep down, I knew better. Something wasn't right with this house. The next day, I called the landlord and demanded answers. She seemed annoyed at first, but when I mentioned the noises in the walls, her tone shifted. Just slightly, but enough to make me uneasy. You're probably just hearing the old heating ducts, she said a little too quickly. That house has always been drafty. I wanted to push further, but something about the way she answered made it clear she wasn't interested in having this conversation. That night, I tried to sleep with headphones on, drowning out the sounds with music. It didn't help. Around 2 a.m., the scratching started again, louder than ever. It was right behind the headboard, like claws raking against the wall just inches from my skull. I yanked off the headphones, my heart racing. But this time, it wasn't just scratching. There was movement, slow, shuffling movement inside the walls. And then, just as I was about to bolt out of the room, I heard it again. Let me out. It was clearer this time, as if someone was speaking through a crack in the plaster. A chill ran through me, and before I could stop myself, I whispered back, "Who's there?" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, From inside the wall came the faintest reply. I live here. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I did the only logical thing I could think of. I called a contractor. I told him I needed to inspect the walls for water damage, and he agreed to come by later that afternoon. When he arrived, I led him to the bedroom and pointed to the wall where the noises had been coming from. I think there's something inside, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He gave me a weird look, but shrugged. It happens, he said. Could be mice, maybe squirrels. He pulled out a small saw and began cutting into the drywall. I stood behind him, arms crossed, trying to suppress the wave of nausea building in my stomach. As the saw bit into the wall, a strange smell wafted out, musty, rotten, like something old and forgotten. He cut a hole about the size of a basketball and shined his flashlight inside. Jesus, he muttered under his breath. What is it? I asked, my heart pounding. He didn't answer right away. He just reached into the hole and pulled something out, a small, crumpled piece of fabric. It was filthy, stained with dirt and something darker, almost black. It was a child's dress. A wave of cold fear washed over me. There's something else in here, the contractor said, his voice uneasy. He reached further into the wall, grunting as he pulled. And then, slowly, something slid out of the opening. A small wooden box, old and cracked, with strange carvings etched into the surface. I stared at the box, my pulse racing. What the hell is that? The contractor shook his head. I don't know, but this isn't good. He handed me the box, and the second my fingers touched it, I felt it, a surge of cold like ice water running through my veins. The carvings on the box seemed to pulse under my fingertips, and I swear I could hear faint whispers emanating from inside. I wanted to throw it away, to drop it and run, but something held me in place. Whatever this is, you need to get rid of it, the contractor said, his voice low. Now! I nodded, my hands shaking as I carried the box outside. I didn't care where it went. I just knew it couldn't stay in that house. I drove to the nearest dumpster and threw it in, slamming the lid shut, as if that would keep whatever was inside from following me. When I got back to the house, the air felt different, lighter somehow. The walls were silent. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I thought it was over. Until that night. I was lying in bed, finally drifting off to sleep, when I heard it. Afan familiar whisper. I told you, I live here. All right, before you judge me, just know this. We didn't mean to blow up the float. It was supposed to be a simple, fun prank, a little fireworks to spice things up, not a freaking explosion. But like most things in high school, it got way out of hand. It all started with homecoming week, and let me tell you, at our school, homecoming was a huge deal. Every class built a float for the parade, and there was a whole competition over which one was the best. Seniors usually dominated, obviously, but this particular year, the juniors, aka us, decided to pull off something epic to ensure we stole the win. Our float theme? Blast from the past. Cute, right? Well, leave it to my friend Evan to take that theme way too literally. The idea was simple, or so it seemed at the time. We thought it would be awesome to rig the float with a couple of small fireworks, so when it rolled by the judges, we'd set them off and really make an impression. Nothing crazy, just a few sparklers or maybe some smoke bombs. But then Evan, who had never met a bad idea he didn't love, said, "Why don't we go bigger? Like Roman candles or something." Roman candles? I asked, already feeling like this was a terrible idea. Yeah, dude, Evan grinned. They're legal, right? For the record, they're not legal in our state. But Evan somehow convinced one of his older cousins to buy a box of fireworks from across the state line. And the next thing I knew, we were in the school parking lot with enough pyrotechnics to make the 4th of July look like a campfire. Trust me, Evan said as we stared at the pile of explosives. This is going to be legendary. I should have walked away right then and there, but of course I didn't. So, the night before the parade, we were in the school's auto shop, putting the final touches on our float. It was looking okay, I guess. We had a giant papier-mâché dinosaur because nothing says blast from the past like a T-Rex, a bunch of old records glued to the side, and a boombox taped to the back for some retro flair. But the real piece de resistance? Evan's firework rig. He'd rigged 2 Roman candles and a handful of bottle rockets to the front of the float, right next to the T-Rex's head. The plan was to light them up just as we passed the judges. It'll be epic. Evan kept saying, "The judges will love it." Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to tape fireworks to a moving vehicle, but it's not an exact science. We were using duct tape, zip ties, and what little common sense we had left to strap the whole thing together. I remember asking Evan, "Are you sure this is safe?" "It'll be fine," he said, waving me off. Worst case, they fizzle out. Spoiler, they did not fizzle out. The next day, we were lined up at the start of the parade route, feeling pretty good about ourselves. Our float looked decent. The music was blasting, and Evan was practically vibrating with excitement, holding a lighter like some kind of mad scientist about to bring Frankenstein to life. As we rolled down the street, people started cheering. I'll admit it felt amazing. The T-Rex had bobbed with every bump in the road, and kids were shouting, "Cool float," from the sidewalks. Even the teachers seemed impressed. And then we reached the judges' table. Evan grinned like a lunatic. Showtime. He flicked the lighter, leaned over the edge of the float, and lit the Roman candles. For a second, everything was perfect. Sparks shot out of the tubes, whistling into the air, and the crowd erupted into applause. People were laughing, cheering, snapping pictures. It was exactly what we'd imagined. Then the bottle rockets ignited. Now, in theory, bottle rockets are supposed to launch into the air. In practice, not so much. The first rocket shot straight into the T-Rex's head. Boom! The dinosaur exploded in a cloud of papier-mâché and glitter, sending chunks of cardboard flying in every direction. The second rocket ricocheted off the side of the float and zipped straight toward the crowd. People started screaming and diving for cover. "Shut it off! Shut it off!" I yelled, but Evan was already panicking, flailing at the fireworks like they were wild animals. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the Roman candle tipped over. The next thing I knew, it was firing straight into the cab of the pickup truck towing our float. I'll never forget the look on the driver's face, a mix of confusion, horror, and the dawning realization that his truck was now on fire. "Get out!" he screamed, slamming on the brakes and bailing out of the cab. The float jerked to a stop, and that's when the fireworks tipped over again, this time pointing directly into the open door of the school gym. So there we were. The T-Rex was in flaming ruins, the truck was billowing smoke, and now the gym floor was rapidly filling with fireworks. Roman candles were bouncing off walls, ricocheting off bleachers, and sending sparks flying in every direction. People were running, teachers were shouting, and someone, I think it was the janitor, yelled, "Everybody out!" Evan was still on the float, frantically kicking at the fireworks like that would somehow solve the problem. "Just run!" I screamed, grabbing him by the collar and dragging him off the float as another bottle rocket zipped past our heads. We hit the ground running, sprinting down the street as the chaos behind us reached its peak. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the distinct whoop-whoop of fire truck sirens approaching. In the end, the parade was canceled. The gym had to be evacuated. The fire department spent 2 hours putting out the smoldering remains of our float, and the entire junior class was banned from participating in any future school events. Evan got suspended for a week, and I had to spend 2 Saturdays helping the janitor scrape melted firework debris off the gym floor. The driver of the pickup truck was not happy. Turns out, melted Roman candle residue is a nightmare to clean off leather seats. But the real kicker? We didn't even win the float competition. The seniors took first place with some lame pirate ship theme. They didn't even have fireworks. Still though, I gotta admit, when I look back on it, I can't help but laugh. Because while we may not have won the float competition, we did go down in history. And really, isn't that what high school is all about? It started with a playlist. We'd been together for 2 years, long enough that I knew all his habits, his quirks, and his little rituals. One of those rituals was making playlists for me. He'd always say music was the language of emotions, and every few months, he'd send me a new one filled with songs that reminded him of us. I still remember the first playlist he ever made me, titled Sunday Morning Feels. It was the soundtrack to the beginning of us, lazy weekends, late night talks, and stolen kisses. So when he sent me a new playlist one random Thursday afternoon, I smiled, thinking it was another one of his sweet surprises. I plugged in my headphones, pressed play, and let the music wash over me. The first song was lovely, a familiar tune that made me think of road trips and holding hands in the car. But then came the second track, a love song, one I'd never heard before. The lyrics were beautiful, but something about them made my heart ache in a way I couldn't quite explain. I clicked over to see the rest of the playlist. Instead of the usual feel-good songs or tracks we both love, it was packed with sappy, romantic ballads. Not the kind of songs you send to your girlfriend of 2 years. No, these were the kind of songs you send to someone new, someone you're falling for. Something in my chest twisted. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just feeling sentimental. But deep down, I knew the truth. This playlist wasn't meant for me. It had someone else's name written all over it. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. That night, I watched him carefully, looking for cracks in the version of him I thought I knew. He seemed normal, maybe a little distracted, but nothing obvious. We ate dinner on the couch, as usual, scrolling through Netflix in comfortable silence. "Thanks for the playlist," I said casually, testing the waters. He glanced up from his phone, and for a split second, just the briefest moment, I saw a panic flicker in his eyes. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a lazy smile. "Yeah? You like it?" he asked, like he didn't have a care in the world. I forced a smile. "It's different from your usual ones." He shrugged, already turning his attention back to his phone. "Thought I'd switch things up." That was line number 1. The playlist stayed on my mind for days. Every time I tried to shake the feeling, it clung to me, nagging like a splinter under the skin. I told myself I was being ridiculous. People could like different kinds of music. There was no rule saying love songs had to mean something sinister. But the doubt was there, and it was growing. A week later, the second clue arrived, disguised as a slip of the tongue. We were out at dinner when he mentioned someone named Lena. "Lena says that place downtown has amazing cocktails," he said casually, twirling his fork in his pasta. I blinked. "Lena?" He froze for a fraction of a second. "Oh yeah, a girl from work. You haven't met her. A girl from work?" He said it so easily, like it was no big deal. But something about the way her name rolled off his tongue sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to ask more. "How often do you talk to Lena? Do you text her? Have you ever gotten cocktails with her?" But I bit my tongue. I didn't want to come across as insecure or jealous. After all, it was just a name, right? Except it wasn't. The next few weeks were a blur of little lies. Tiny inconsistencies that didn't mean much on their own, but added up to something undeniable. He started working late more often. He became more protective of his phone, keeping it close to him at all times. Once, I reached for it to check the time, and he grabbed it from me so fast you'd think I was holding a bomb. "You know I don't like people going through my stuff," he said, his tone sharp. That was line number 2. We'd always shared our phones without a second thought. I knew then that whatever he was hiding, it lived inside that screen. But it wasn't until the third lie that everything unraveled. It was a Friday night, and we were supposed to have dinner at home. I'd texted him earlier, asking when he'd be home, and he'd replied with, "Running late, might be stuck at the office a bit longer." Something didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the playlist, maybe it was Lena, or maybe it was just my gut telling me that things didn't add up. Whatever it was, I grabbed my coat and decided to swing by his office. When I got there, the lights were off. The whole building was dark. I stood in the parking lot, my breath fogging up in the cold night air, staring at the empty windows. He wasn't at work. He hadn't been stuck at the office. My heart pounded as I got back into my car. I knew then that it was over. Whatever we had, whatever we were, it was gone. I just needed to know the truth. I drove around for a while, aimlessly circling the streets, until a sick thought popped into my head. Lena. I knew the area where she lived. He'd mentioned it once in passing. So, like some kind of deranged detective, I drove there. And that's when I saw it. His car, parked outside an apartment complex. I sat there for what felt like hours, the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. I knew he was inside. I knew he was with her. And suddenly, everything made sense. The playlist, the lies, the late nights. I didn't need to go inside. I didn't need to confront him. I'd already seen enough. The next morning, he came home like nothing had happened. He kissed me on the forehead, smiled, and asked if I wanted pancakes for breakfast. I stared at him, wondering how someone could lie so easily, so effortlessly. "Did you have a long night at the office?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. He hesitated just for a second. Yeah, he said. It was brutal. That was lie number 3. And just like that, I knew I was done. It started off perfectly. One of those situations that make you believe maybe the universe doesn't hate me after all. His name was Eric, and we met in the most unexpected way, stuck in line at a bakery on a rainy Sunday morning. I remember fumbling with my umbrella and muttering something about how I always picked the wrong days to leave the house. And he laughed, an easy, genuine laugh that made me feel warm despite being drenched. We ended up talking the whole time we waited, and when we got to the counter, he insisted on paying for my coffee and croissant. Consider it a good omen, he said with a grin. I was so surprised that I just smiled and said thanks. It was the kind of gesture you don't see much these days. Kind, spontaneous, with no ulterior motive. Or so I thought. We exchanged numbers before we left, and I remember feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. Actual, real excitement. It was that giddy, fluttery feeling in your stomach that makes you want to dance around your kitchen like a kid. I wasn't planning on dating again. I'd been burned too many times, but Eric seemed different. He texted me later that same day, asking how my coffee was. Simple, sweet. I like that. He didn't play it cool or wait 3 days to message me. Over the next couple of weeks, we texted constantly. Funny little updates about our days, random memes, late-night conversations about movies and music. It felt easy, effortless, like slipping into a warm bath after a long day. We went on our first date a week later. It was exactly what I needed. No pressure, no awkward small talk. We wandered through an art exhibit, making jokes about the weird, abstract pieces neither of us understood, and grabbed dinner at a cozy little restaurant nearby. By the time the check came, I was hooked. I found myself thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I've finally found someone who won't leave when things get hard. For a while, it seemed like I was right. Eric was thoughtful, funny, and affectionate. He called just to hear my voice, made plans ahead of time, and even brought me soup when I caught a nasty cold. I let my guard down little by little, thinking that maybe, just maybe, it was safe to believe in something again. And that's the thing about hope. It makes you feel alive, right up until the moment it rips your heart out. One night, about 3 months in, we were supposed to meet for dinner. I'd made a reservation at our favorite restaurant, the same one from our first date. I was excited. He'd been acting a little distant lately, and I thought maybe a nice dinner would help us reconnect. He texted me an hour before. Can't make it tonight. Something came up. Sorry. It was abrupt. No explanation, no offer to reschedule. Just a vague excuse that made my stomach churn with unease. I told myself not to read into it. Everyone has off days, but the little voice in the back of my mind whispered, something's not right. I brushed it off. I'd been through enough failed relationships to know that overthinking can ruin a good thing. So I let it slide. But the thing is, when your gut is telling you something's wrong, it's usually right. A few days later, I found out the truth, completely by accident. I was scrolling through Instagram, mindlessly tapping through stories, when I saw it, Eric, at the same restaurant where we were supposed to have dinner, with another woman. I felt the air leave my lungs like someone had punched me in the chest. There they were, smiling and clinking glasses like it was the most natural thing in the world. My heart sank as I realized that while I was sitting at home, waiting for him to explain why he canceled, he'd been out on a date with someone else. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, hoping there was some logical explanation. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. He'd lied to me. And not just about that night, about everything. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He gave me some half-assed excuse about how he wasn't ready for anything serious and didn't know how to tell me. As if that made it better. As if that erased the fact that he made me believe we were building something real, only to pull the rug out from under me without a second thought. I blocked him right then and there, deleted every text, every picture, every memory of the moments I thought meant something. But the damage was done. It's not just the betrayal that breaks you. It's the realization that you let yourself believe again, that you ignored the little voice in your head, hoping this time would be different. It's the exhaustion of starting over, only to end up exactly where you started, hurt, confused, and wondering why you even bother. People always tell you to keep trying and don't give up. But no one talks about how much it hurts to keep opening your heart, only to have it crushed again and again. No one warns you about the emotional toll of rebuilding yourself after every disappointment, until there's nothing left to give. That's where I am now. Empty. I don't even get angry anymore when things don't work out. I just accept it, like, of course it didn't work. Why would it? I think that's what ruined dating for me. Not the ghosting, not the lies, not even the betrayal. It's the way every failed connection chips away at your ability to hope. It's the way you start to expect the worst from people, because at least that way, you won't be disappointed. These days, I go on dates with the same energy I bring to dentist appointments. Something to get through, not something to enjoy. If it works, great. If not, well, I expected that anyway. I wish I could be one of those people who bounce back easily, who dive headfirst into every new relationship with unshakable optimism. But I'm not. Not anymore. Because the truth is, love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about being willing to try over and over again, even when everything in you is screaming, why bother? And right now, I don't know if I have it in me to try again. This one was supposed to be simple. I had one rule: no repeats. Casual sex is like fast food, it's good in the moment, but no one really wants to eat the same thing twice in a row. Keep things light, keep things fun, and most importantly, keep things moving. It worked for me until it didn't. It started at a friend's birthday party, the kind that's just an excuse for adults to drink too much and pretend we still know how to have fun. I wasn't even planning to stay long, but then I saw her. God help me. She was the most intriguing disaster I'd ever laid eyes on. Messy blonde hair, smudged eyeliner, and this looked like she'd either forgotten what day it was or genuinely didn't care. Her name was Zoe. She was standing by the punch bowl, pouring herself what had to be her fourth or fifth drink, and I knew right away that she was trouble. The fun kind. I approached her with my usual confidence, the kind born from knowing there were no expectations. So, are you here for the party, or did you just wander in by accident? She smirked. Does it matter? From that moment on, I was hooked. We spent the next hour talking nonsense, how all streaming platforms are a scam, the ethical implications of pineapple on pizza, and how neither of us had any idea what adulthood was supposed to feel like. I knew I was in trouble when she made me laugh, so hard I almost snorted my drink. One thing led to another, as it always does, and by midnight, we were sneaking out of the party like two teenagers on a dare. The plan was simple: her place, a few hours of fun, and then I'd be out the door before the sun even had a chance to ruin everything with its unforgiving morning light. Her apartment was exactly what I expected. Half unpacked moving boxes, a sad little plant struggling for life on the windowsill, and an art print crooked on the wall that said, "This must be the place." It was chaos, but the kind of chaos that felt oddly comforting. Things escalated quickly, as they tend to in these situations. The chemistry was off the charts, messy, electric, the kind of night that makes you forget your own name. And for a while, it was perfect. Exactly what I'd sign up for. No emotional messiness, no future implications. Just two people losing themselves in each other for a few hours. And then it happened, right in the middle of things, like right in the middle, she suddenly stopped, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "What are we doing with our lives?" I froze. Not exactly the kind of dirty talk I was expecting. Having a good time? I offered, trying to steer us back on course. But Zoe wasn't having it. She sat up, pulled the sheet around herself like a philosopher queen, and said, "No, seriously. What are we doing? Is this it? Are we just going to keep hooking up with strangers until we die?" And just like that, the mood evaporated faster than my will to live. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was drunk, existential, or both. Is this a conversation we need to have right now? I asked, hoping, praying, that she'd laugh it off and let us get back to business. But Zoe just shrugged. I mean, why not? When else are we going to talk about it? Now listen, I've had my fair share of weird post-hookup conversations, usually involving snacks or awkward discussions about Uber rates. But this was new. I'd signed up for a fun, forgettable night, and instead, I was getting dragged into an existential crisis in real time. And the worst part? She wasn't wrong. I tried to laugh it off, but the truth was her words hit a little too close to home. I'd been living my life on shuffle, jumping from one fling to the next, convincing myself that this was what freedom felt like. No attachments, no complications, just moment after fleeting moment. But now, sitting in Zoe's chaotic apartment, it all felt hollow. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I thought this was what we were supposed to do. Have fun, stay free, avoid the whole messy relationship thing. Zoe gave me a look. One of those, oh, honey looks that feels like both a compliment and an insult at the same time. And how's that working out for you? I opened my mouth to respond, and then shut it because the truth was it wasn't. Not really. Sure, the freedom was nice. The thrill of meeting someone new, the rush of a first kiss, the satisfaction of knowing I could leave whenever I wanted. But somewhere along the way, it had started to feel less like freedom and more like running. Running from intimacy, from vulnerability, from the terrifying idea that maybe I wanted more than just another night of fun. Zoe saw it all on my face. Every doubt, every unspoken fear. And instead of making it weird, she just smiled. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm running too." We sat there in silence for a while, two flawed people wrapped in sheets and awkward honesty, both realizing that maybe, just maybe, we weren't as cool and carefree as we pretended to be. When morning came, there were no awkward goodbyes or promises to do this again sometime. We didn't exchange numbers, and we didn't try to make it something it wasn't. But we did make coffee, and for once, I didn't feel the need to bolt for the door the second the sun came up. As I sipped my coffee and watched Zoe water her sad little plant, I realized something important. I wasn't just avoiding relationships. I was avoiding myself. Every hookup, every fling, every fleeting connection was just another way to dodge the hard questions. The ones about what I really wanted and what I was really afraid of. Zoe didn't fix me that night. This isn't that kind of story, but she did make me realize that it's okay to stop running. That maybe, instead of jumping from one temporary thrill to the next, I could slow down. Maybe even figure out what it is I'm really looking for. When I finally left her apartment, I felt lighter. Not because I had all the answers, but because I was finally asking the right questions. And the next time I found myself at a party, flirting with someone new, I didn't feel the same pressure to make it a thing. I didn't need to prove anything to them or to myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I saw it fluttering under my windshield wiper the second I stepped out of the coffee shop. A bright orange slip, flapping smugly in the breeze like it was proud of ruining my day. "No," I muttered, already knowing what it was. I jogged the last few steps to my car, coffee sloshing dangerously in my to-go cup, and yanked the slip out from under the wiper. Violación expired mita. Amount due, $65. $65 for being 10 minutes late. I stared at the ticket like it had personally insulted my ancestors. It didn't make sense. The meter was only expired by a few minutes. I knew because I'd set a timer on my phone, and it had buzzed right when I was waiting in line for my oat milk latte. The universe could have cut me a little slack, but no. Timing was everything, and my timing, as usual, sucked. I threw the ticket onto the dashboard with a sigh and took a sip of my coffee, trying to calm myself down. The drink was lukewarm. Of course it was. I leaned against the car and scrolled through my texts, hoping for some distraction. There was one from my sister, Laura. "Call me when you can." Great. Laura only sent messages like that when she was about to ask for a favor. I wasn't in the mood, but I knew if I didn't call her, she'd just keep texting until my phone exploded. So, I dialed. "Hey," she answered on the first ring. Way too cheerful for someone who was about to ruin my day. "What's up? I just got a parking ticket," I grumbled. "Oof. That sucks." She didn't sound particularly sympathetic. "Listen, I need a favor." There it was. "Of course you do. Come on, it's not a big deal," she said, the way people always do when they're about to ask for a huge deal. "Can you pick up Jake from soccer practice? I'm stuck at work, and I won't make it in time." "Laura," I started, but she cut me off. "Please? You live like, 5 minutes from the field? Just this once." I sighed, rubbing my temples. It wasn't like I had anything better to do. And saying no to Laura always felt more exhausting than just giving in. "Fine y materd. You're the best," she chirped. "I owe you one." She did not owe me one. She owed me about 20. But I didn't argue. I hung up, tossed the empty coffee cup into the passenger seat, and pulled out of the parking spot. Carefully, because the universe seemed to be gunning for me today. By the time I got to the soccer field, Jake was waiting on the bench, kicking at the dirt with all the enthusiasm of a kid whose team just lost by 10 goals. His bag was slung over one shoulder, and he looked up when he saw me, clearly disappointed it wasn't his mom. "Hey, bud," I said, trying to sound upbeat. "Ready to go?" He shrugged, dragging his feet as he followed me to the car. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Jake. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He had that defeated look that only 9-year-olds can pull off, like the weight of the world had just crushed his tiny soul. "Tough game, huh?" I ventured. He sighed dramatically. "We lost. Again." "Yeah, that sucks," I said. "But, hey, at least you showed up, right? That's half the battle." Jake gave me a look that said, "You have no idea what you're talking about, old man." We lapsed into silence again, and I let it sit there. Sometimes kids just need space to sulk. I got that. When we stopped at a red light, I glanced at him again and had an idea. "Hey, you want to get ice cream?" Jake perked up just a little, even though it's not the weekend. "Yeah," I said. "Today's been kind of a garbage day. I think we both deserve a treat." He grinned for the first time all afternoon, and in that moment I felt like a damn hero. We pulled into the parking lot of a little ice cream shop, and for the first time all day, something went right. No parking meters, no tickets, just a free lot, wide open and waiting for us. Jake ordered the biggest sundae on the menu. Chocolate with sprinkles, whipped cream, and a cherry on top. I got a plain vanilla cone because I was still salty about the $65 ticket and didn't want to spend any more money than I had to. We sat outside on a bench, the sun setting behind us, and for a while everything felt okay. Jake dug into his sundae like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted, and I let the cold sweetness of the ice cream melt away the edges of my bad mood. "Thanks for the ice cream," Jake said around a mouthful of sprinkles. "No problem, kid." He paused for a moment, then looked up at me, his face serious. "You know, even when you lose, it's still kind of fun." I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden wisdom from a 9-year-old. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I guess it is." And for the first time that day, I smiled. Because maybe that was the lesson I needed. You don't always win. Sometimes you get parking tickets, or lose soccer games, or have bad days for no good reason. But that doesn't mean you can't enjoy a little ice cream along the way. We finished our treats, and as I drove Jake home, the weight of the parking ticket felt a little lighter. Life, I realized, is full of little defeats. But every now and then, you get to win a small victory, like a perfect scoop of vanilla, or a kid who thinks you're cool for 5 minutes. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Nate and I were inseparable from the moment we met in our freshman year of high school. He was the kind of friend who knew every weird thing about me. The way I eat fries with mustard, how I cry at every Pixar movie, even the exact playlists I make when I'm spiraling. He was my constant. Through first loves, heartbreaks, and family drama, Nate was always there. Solid, dependable like gravity. And not once did I think we'd end up in bed together. But life, as it turns out, loves a plot twist. It happened the night of our friend Maya's wedding. Nate and I were both in the bridal party, looking sharp and probably a little too drunk by the time the reception started winding down. You know how weddings are a lot of emotions, too much champagne, and a weird energy in the air that makes everything feel more romantic than it really is. By the time the DJ played the last song, most of the guests had either paired off or passed out. But not us. Nate and I danced like idiots until the lights came on, then stumbled back to the hotel room we were sharing to save on costs. It was supposed to be simple. I mean, we'd crashed in the same bed before, no big deal. Except this time it was different. We were both a little too buzzed, a little too comfortable. Nate flopped onto the bed, grinning up at me with that lazy smile of his. The one that always made me laugh no matter how mad I was. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed beside him, still in my bridesmaid dress, exhausted but buzzing with leftover adrenaline from the night. "You think Maya and Ryan are going to make it?" I asked, staring up at the ceiling. Nate chuckled. 50-50 tops. We both laughed, and for a second, it was just like every other night we'd spent together over the years. Comfortable, easy, safe. Until it wasn't. I don't know how it happened. One minute, we were lying there talking about the wedding, and the next I felt his hand brush against mine. It wasn't intentional, just a small, accidental touch. But something about it sent a jolt through me. I glanced over at him, and our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us shifted, heavy with something unspoken. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and suddenly, I was hyper-aware of everything. The way his shirt clung to his chest, the warmth radiating off his body, the fact that we were way too close. I told myself it was just the alcohol, that this was a bad idea, that Nate was my best friend, and friends don't do this. But before I could stop myself, I leaned in, and then, somehow, we were kissing. It wasn't awkward or hesitant. It was urgent, like we'd been waiting for this without even realizing it. His hands were in my hair, my fingers tangled in his shirt, and everything about it felt too good. Too easy. Too right. We didn't stop. The next morning, I woke up tangled in hotel sheets, with Nate's arm draped lazily across my waist. For a split second, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. Oh my God! We slept together. I stared at the ceiling, my heart racing. This wasn't just some random hookup. This was Nate, my best friend, the person who knew everything about me, the one person I couldn't afford to lose. What the hell had we done? Nate stirred beside me, groaning softly as he blinked awake. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I whispered, my throat dry. He propped himself up on one elbow, giving me a sleepy grin. "So, that happened." I let out a nervous laugh. "Yeah, it did." We lay there in awkward silence for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, Nate ran a hand through his hair and gave me a lopsided smile. "You okay?" Was I? Honestly, I had no idea. "Yeah, elite. Are you?" He nodded, but his expression was unreadable. "Yeah, I mean, it's just us, right? No big deal." I forced a smile, even though my chest felt tight. Right? No big deal. But it was a big deal. For the next few weeks, we pretended like nothing had changed. We hung out like normal, watching movies, grabbing beers, texting constantly. But the tension was always there, just beneath the surface. Every time our hands brushed or our eyes lingered a second too long, it felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between friendship and something more. And the worst part, I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the way his hands felt on my skin, the way he whispered my name, the way everything about it felt so goddamn right. I wanted it to happen again, desperately, but I was too scared to admit it. What if it was just a one-time thing for him? What if I told him how I felt and ruined everything? Then one night, it all came crashing down. We were sitting on my couch, watching some dumb comedy, when Nate turned to me, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said. My heart dropped. This is it, I thought. This is where he tells me it was a mistake. But instead, he said, "I can't keep pretending like that night didn't mean anything to me." I blinked, stunned. "What?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I've been trying to play it cool, but the truth is, I can't stop thinking about you. About us. And it's driving me crazy." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. You feel the same way?" Nate gave me a crooked smile. "Yeah, dumbass. I've been in love with you for years. I just didn't realize it until now." I stared at him, my mind racing. All the fear, all the uncertainty. It melted away, leaving only one undeniable truth. "I love you too," I whispered. And just like that, everything clicked into place. That was 3 months ago. We're still figuring things out, navigating the messy transition from best friends to something more, but it's good. Better than I ever imagined. Some people say you shouldn't mix friendship with romance, that it's too risky, too complicated. But honestly, loving Nate is the easiest thing I've ever done. And if we screw it up along the way, well, at least we'll have each other to figure it out. I've always considered myself a pretty lucky guy. No allergies, no weird food intolerances, and no strange reactions to anything. You know those people who have to carry around EpiPens or meticulously check labels before eating. Not me. I could eat peanuts, roll in grass, pet every dog in sight. Nothing ever bothered me. I was untouchable. That is, until that day. It started out so simple. I was at this backyard barbecue that my friend Julie was hosting. One of those classic summer parties with lawn games, too much beer, and the smell of burgers wafting through the air. The sun was shining, the music was blasting, and everything was perfect. I was in my element, laughing with friends, tossing a football around, and casually loading my plate with every type of grilled meat in sight. About halfway through the afternoon, Julie brought out a tray of food that had everyone buzzing: shrimp skewers. Now, I'm not usually a huge seafood guy, but they smelled amazing and everyone was raving about them. "You've got to try one," Julie said, thrusting a skewer into my hand. I hesitated for a second, mostly because I wasn't sure shrimp was really my thing. But Julie's cooking was legendary, and I wasn't about to be the weirdo who passed up her famous shrimp. Besides, I never had any problems with shellfish before, so why not? So I bit into one. At first it was fine. The shrimp was perfectly cooked, juicy, with just the right amount of char from the grill. I chewed, swallowed, and went for another. And that's when it started. This weird, tickly feeling in my throat. I coughed once, then twice, trying to clear it, but the tickle wouldn't go away. It felt like I had swallowed a whole cactus. I figured it was just a fluke, maybe some stray seasoning that didn't agree with me. No big deal. I took a sip of beer to wash it down, but instead of getting better, the tickle got worse. Way worse. Now, my throat was starting to feel tight, like someone was slowly tightening a belt around my neck. I tried to clear my throat again, but it just made things worse. "Hey, you okay?" Julie asked, noticing that I had gone from enjoying my shrimp to looking like I was trying to cough up a hairball. Yeah, just something stuck," I managed to say, my voice sounding strangled. But as the seconds ticked by, that something stuck feeling turned in a full-on panic. My throat wasn't just tickling, it was closing up. I could feel it. Each breath was getting harder to take, my chest tightening like I'd been sucker punched by a sumo wrestler. Panic started creeping in. My hands were getting clammy. My head felt light, and I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. My vision started to blur around the edges, like the whole world was slowly fading out. Julie's eyes widened as she realized something was really wrong. Do you have allergies or something?" she asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Allergies?" I wheezed. "No, never had any." But even as I said it, my body was telling a different story. My lips were swelling up, my throat felt like it was shrinking by the second, and I was starting to wonder if this was how it all ended. At a barbecue, over shrimp. Julie's face went pale as I gasped for air. "Holy shit! Someone call 911!" she yelled, and suddenly the whole party was in a frenzy. People were grabbing their phones, running around, shouting things like, "Does anyone have an EpiPen? And is he allergic to shrimp?" All I could think was, allergic to shrimp? I've never even been stung by a bee. Meanwhile, my body was betraying me in every way possible. My throat was closing up fast. My face felt like it was on fire, and breathing had turned into this horrible wheezing sound, like someone was slowly deflating a balloon. I felt my knees buckle, and I dropped to the ground, clutching my throat like that was going to help somehow. In the chaos, someone handed me a bottle of water, like that was going to solve my rapidly closing windpipe. I waved it away and croaked out, "Hospital now." The next few minutes were a blur. Someone half-carried, half-dragged me to a car. I remember the panicked faces, the sound of tires screeching, and Julie freaking out next to me, trying to keep me conscious by yelling, "Stay with me," like we were in a bad action movie. The entire ride, my chest kept tightening, my breath shallow and ragged. My vision was practically gone at this point, just flashes of light and shadow, and all I could think was, I'm about to die over some goddamn shrimp. By the time we reached the ER, I was barely holding on. They rushed me inside, and next thing I knew, I was surrounded by doctors and nurses, all talking fast and moving faster. I heard someone say, "anaphylactic shock," and I realized I'm having an allergic reaction. They jabbed me with an EpiPen, and within minutes, I could breathe again. Slowly, the world started coming back into focus. My vision cleared, my throat relaxed, and I was no longer convinced I was going to die right there on the hospital floor. I lay there, oxygen mask on my face, feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck while the doctor explained what had happened. Turns out I had developed a sudden, severe allergy to shellfish. Anaphylaxis, the kind of thing that, if left untreated, can kill you in minutes. As I sat in the hospital bed, trying to process everything, Mike showed up, wide-eyed and still pale from the shock of it all. "Dude," he said, shaking his head, "you almost died over shrimp. You know that, right?" I just nodded, too tired to argue. "You're never living this down," he added, grinning now that I was clearly going to survive. "I'm going to remind you every time we go out to eat. Hey, remember when you almost became a cautionary tale over shrimp skewers?" I groaned. Great, now I'm a meme. A few hours later, after the doctors cleared me and sent me home with my very own prescription for an EpiPen, I was still trying to wrap my head around it. A shrimp allergy? Seriously? At 28 years old? And how could it hit me so fast? No warning, no symptoms, just BM almost dead at a barbecue. But that's life, right? One minute you're enjoying some grilled shrimp, and the next, you're flirting with death in the shallow end of a hospital ER. The worst part? Now I'm that guy. The guy who has to ask waiters 1,000 questions and inspect every menu for hidden seafood. My days of carefree eating are officially over. So now, whenever someone mentions shrimp, I get this little twinge of fear. I don't care if it's shrimp cocktail, shrimp scampi, or even a picture of one on a menu. I steer clear like it's radioactive. Because I'm not risking my life over a damn seafood platter again. And hey, if you ever see me at a barbecue, just make sure to keep the shellfish far away. Trust me, I've learned my lesson. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into Dad's driveway was the old mailbox, tilted slightly to the left, just like it had been since I was a kid. He always said he'd get around to fixing it, but somehow, that day never came. Now it just stood there, rusted and stubborn, like a marker for everything in this house that had been left half done. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel and staring at the front porch. The windows were dark, but the porch light buzzed faintly against the night, like a beacon guiding me back to a place I'd spent years trying to leave behind. I hadn't planned on coming back, but the call from the nursing home came earlier that morning, and suddenly there was no way around it. Dad was gone, and someone had to clear out the house. And that someone was me. I took a deep breath, grabbed the duffel bag from the passenger seat, and stepped into the cold autumn air. The leaves scattered across the yard were damp and brown, slick under my boots. They smelled like the kind of decay that sneaks up on you, slow and inevitable like time itself. The key was exactly where I expected it to be, tucked under the chipped ceramic frog by the front steps. Some things never change. I opened the door, and the familiar smell of wood polish and stale cigarettes washed over me. Dad had quit smoking years ago, but the scent never really left the house, like it was stitched into the fabric of the place, woven into the carpets and the curtains and every surface he'd ever touched. I set my bag down in the hallway and flipped on the light. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown too much since the last time I was here. Either way, it felt like stepping into a memory I hadn't asked to revisit. The living room was exactly how he left it. Recliner in front of the TV, half-finished crossword on the side table, a bottle of aspirin lying on its side. The dust clinging to everything gave the place a muted, grayish glow, like it was waiting for someone to come back and bring it to life. But no one was coming back. I sat down on the edge of the recliner, feeling the worn fabric give under my weight, and stared at the crossword puzzle. He'd filled in most of it, but a few squares were still blank. I picked up the pencil from the table and traced the unfinished letters, as if completing it would somehow make him feel closer. But the answers didn't come to me. They never do. Clearing out someone's life is a strange thing. You find pieces of them in places you didn't expect. Old receipts tucked into coat pockets, half-empty notebooks filled with thoughts they never finished writing down. The kitchen cupboards were full of mismatched mugs and expired cans of soup. In the bedroom, the drawers were crammed with old clothes, worn thin and soft from years of use. There were photos, too, black and white snapshots of Dad as a young man, grinning awkwardly at the camera, looking like someone I never really knew. And then, in the bottom drawer of the dresser, I found the watch. It was old, one of those heavy brass things that people don't wear anymore. The glass face was scratched, the hands frozen at 4:17. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my palm, and wondered why he'd kept it. I flipped it over. There was an inscription on the back, barely visible beneath years of wear. For all the time we have left, I sat there, holding the watch in my hand, feeling something heavy settle into my chest. Later that night, I made a bed for myself on the couch, the silence pressing down on me like a second skin. The house was too quiet without Dad's presence. No muffled TV in the background. No sound of his boots shuffling across the kitchen floor. Just the ticking of a clock on the wall, counting down the minutes that no longer seemed to matter. I thought about the watch, the inscription, the life Dad had lived in this house after Mom left. I wondered if he ever felt lonely here. If he ever sat in that same recliner, staring at the unfinished crossword puzzle, wishing things had turned out differently. I lay there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. And then, somewhere between the stillness and the weight of it all, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not the kind of relief you feel when things get easier, but the kind that comes from knowing it's finally okay to stop carrying something you were never meant to hold. The next morning, the sky was pale and overcast, and the air smelled like damp leaves and the promise of rain. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the yard, the old mailbox still tilted stubbornly to the left. I thought about fixing it, grabbing a wrench, straightening it out, making it right. But then I let the thought go. Some things don't need fixing. Before I left, I tucked the watch into my pocket. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. I locked the door behind me and slipped the key back under the ceramic frog, the way Dad always had. As I stood there on the front steps, I realized something. I wasn't coming back. Not to this house. Not to this version of my life. And that was okay. The mailbox would stay tilted. The crossword would stay unfinished. And maybe that was enough. I took one last look at the house, then turned toward the car, the weight in my chest lifting just slightly with each step. And as I drove away, the road stretching out ahead of me, I felt the kind of peace that comes not from closure, but from acceptance. It wasn't a grand feeling, not the kind that knocks you over or leaves you breathless. It was quieter than that, softer, and maybe, just maybe, that was all I needed. I had been living alone in my new apartment for about 2 months when I first noticed something strange. It wasn't anything major, just little things at first. The kind of things you write off because you don't want to admit that something might actually be wrong. The light in the bathroom flickered every time I walked past it. Sometimes my keys weren't where I remembered leaving them. And occasionally, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and feel like someone had been in the room with me. I told myself it was just the stress of moving. New place, new routines. Nothing to worry about. Then I started hearing noises. It always happened late at night, when the building was dead quiet. At first, it sounded like rustling, like papers being shuffled. Then it turned into soft thuds and light scraping noises, almost like someone dragging something heavy over metal. The sound seemed to be coming from the walls, or, more precisely, from the air vents. I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling or some loose ductwork. But then one night, the noise wasn't just scraping. It was breathing. I froze in bed, every muscle tensed, listening to the low, rhythmic sound filtering through the vent near the ceiling. Something was breathing slowly, carefully, just on the other side of the wall. The next morning, I called maintenance. I told the guy who came to check it out that I'd been hearing noises in the vents. He shrugged, said it was probably just a raccoon or a bird that had gotten stuck somewhere. Happens all the time in old buildings, he said. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something about the way he said it, like he knew more than he was letting on, made my skin crawl. He checked the vent in my living room, shined a flashlight inside, and declared it empty. Nothing here, he said, brushing his hands off. Probably just your imagination. But that night, the noises came back. And this time, they were louder. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft scraping sounds echo through the vents. I thought about calling maintenance again, but I knew they wouldn't take me seriously. So I decided to investigate myself. The next day, I bought a flashlight, a screwdriver, and a ladder. I waited until the sun set, and the noises started again. The scraping was faint but steady, coming from the vent near the ceiling of my bedroom. I climbed the ladder, unscrewed the metal grate, and shined the flashlight inside. The duct was dark and narrow, but as I aimed the beam further down, something glinted in the light. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, and then my stomach dropped. It was an eye. Someone was staring back at me from inside the vent. I jerked the flashlight away, heart pounding, barely able to breathe. I slammed the grate back into place and scrambled down the ladder, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the screwdriver. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, holding my phone and knife in a death grip, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. Maybe it had been a trick of the light, a weird reflection. That's what I told myself over and over. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone was living in the vents. The next morning, I called the police. They sent 2 officers to check it out, but by the time they arrived, the noises had stopped. They poked around the apartment, opened the vents, and shined their flashlights inside. Nothing. No sign of anyone or anything inside the ducts. Could have been an animal, one of the officers said, clearly unimpressed with my story. But if you hear anything else, give us a call. That was it. No report, no follow-up. They left, and I was alone again. Except, I wasn't. That night, I barricaded the bedroom door and slept with the lights on. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of faint scratching. It was coming from the vent again, slow, deliberate, like someone dragging their fingers along the inside of the metal. I stared at the grate, paralyzed with fear. Then, just as I started to move, I heard a voice. I know you can hear me. It was a man's voice, soft, calm, and terrifyingly close. My blood turned to ice. I clutched the blanket to my chest, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. The voice came again, a little louder this time. I've been here a long time, watching. I felt bile rise in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I could only listen as the voice whispered through the vent, low and deliberate, like it was savoring every word. I like this place, it said, almost playful. I think I'll stay. I threw the blanket off and bolted out of the room, not even bothering to grab my shoes. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the street, gasping for air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I sat there, heart pounding, staring up at the dark windows of my apartment. I called the landlord the next morning and told her I was moving out. I didn't even bother with an explanation. I just packed whatever I could fit in my car and left. I didn't care about getting my deposit back. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about the man in the vents. And I wonder, is he still there? I think the moment I stopped believing in love was when I found myself sitting in my car, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. It wasn't even a dramatic breakup, nothing like the fights you see in movies. No yelling, no slammed doors, just a single text. I don't think this is working. I'm sorry. That's it. After 6 months of late-night conversations, weekend getaways, meeting each other's families, and hearing him whisper, I think I'm falling for you. He ended it over text, like we were a casual fling, not 2 people who had shared parts of ourselves that no one else knew. I remember sitting there, holding my phone, rereading those words over and over, as if they might change if I just stared hard enough. I thought about texting back, why? What happened? Can't we talk? But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was exhaustion, because deep down I already knew the answer. He was done, and honestly, I wasn't even surprised. That's the thing about dating these days. You start to expect people to leave. They say all the right things, make you believe in the future they're painting for you. And then, out of nowhere, they're gone. No explanation. No closure. Just gone. I think what broke me wasn't the fact that he left. It was the way it made me feel about myself. Like I'd been a fool for believing him, for letting myself get excited, for allowing myself to hope, even after all the times I'd been let down before. Because here's the thing, every failed relationship leaves a mark. And it's not just the heartbreak that wears you down. It's the buildup of all the little lies, the half-truths, the disappointments. It's the constant recalibration of your expectations until you're not hoping for love anymore. You're just hoping they don't hurt you too badly. That's where I am now. I'm not looking for butterflies or soulmates or fairy tale endings. I'm just hoping that if I let someone new in, they won't break me any more than I've already been broken. And even that feels like too much to ask sometimes. I met someone a few months after that breakup. His name was Alex. He was sweet, funny, thoughtful, the kind of guy who texts you just to say good morning and listens when you talk about your day. I liked him. I really did. But I couldn't let myself believe it would last. Every time he made a kind gesture or said something sweet, that voice in my head would whisper, "Don't get too comfortable. He'll leave, just like the rest of them." It was exhausting, constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, bracing myself for the inevitable disappointment. It's like running a marathon you didn't sign up for, with no finish line in sight. And sure enough, one day, it happened. Out of nowhere, Alex pulled away. His texts became shorter, his calls less frequent. Plans that used to excite him were now, maybe next time situations. I asked him if something was wrong, if I had done anything to upset him. He said no, just busy with work. The classic excuse. But I knew better. I knew the signs. I'd seen this movie before, and I already knew how it ended. A few weeks later, he sent the dreaded message. "I've been thinking, and I don't think I'm ready for a relationship right now." And just like that, he was gone. I wasn't even angry this time. Just numb. Because how can you be angry at someone for doing exactly what you expected them to do? People say you shouldn't carry your past relationships into your new ones, but how can you not? How do you go through years of disappointment without becoming guarded? How do you keep opening your heart when every time you do, someone reminds you why you shouldn't? I want to believe that love is still out there. I want to believe that not everyone leaves, that some people stay and fight for you, even when things get hard. But the truth is, I don't know if I have it in me to keep looking. Because dating today feels like playing a game with no rules. You meet someone, they make you feel special for a while, and then just as quickly, they disappear. And every time it happens, you lose a little bit more faith. I used to think that if I just tried hard enough, if I gave people the benefit of the doubt, if I was patient and understanding, things would work out eventually. But now I know that sometimes, no matter how much you try, it's not enough. And that's what scares me the most. It's not the heartbreak itself. It's the way it changes you. It makes you afraid to try again, afraid to hope. Because what if this one hurts even more than the last? What if the next disappointment is the one that finally breaks you? I still go on dates sometimes, but my heart's not in it anymore. I show up, make small talk, laugh at the right moments, but it all feels like going through the motions. Like I'm playing a part in a movie I've seen too many times to enjoy anymore. People tell me I should stay hopeful, that love is worth waiting for. But they don't understand how heavy hope can be when you've been carrying it for too long. So now I've learned to carry less. I don't expect grand gestures or declarations of love. I don't wait by my phone for texts that may never come. And if someone leaves, I let them. Because at the end of the day, the only thing worse than losing someone is losing yourself in the process. And I've come too far to let that happen again. Lies. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. "Wait," he called after me, panic lacing his voice. "Let's talk about this." I paused, hand on the doorknob. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, turning to face him one last time. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." And with that, I walked out, leaving him, the hoodie, and everything we'd built behind. This happened when I was 19, working at a summer job in a small, rural town where my aunt lived. I was helping at a seasonal diner that catered to campers, truckers, and the occasional group of hikers passing through. The place closed around 9 p.m., but by the time I cleaned up and locked everything, it would usually be close to 10. My aunt's house was a few miles down a quiet road surrounded by thick woods, and I'd drive home every night in the same old Honda I'd had since high school. The first few weeks were uneventful, just long hours, greasy food, and the same 3 or 4 songs playing on the jukebox. But one night, I stayed later than usual. I'd had a rush of customers right before closing, and by the time I finished mopping, it was nearly 11 p.m. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, making everything feel darker than usual. I locked up the diner, tossed my apron into the passenger seat, and climbed into my car. As I was backing out, I saw something or someone move at the edge of the parking lot near the tree line. It was quick, just a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, but it made my heart skip a beat. I stopped the car and stared into the darkness. At first, there was nothing, just the dim glow of the parking lot lights and the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. Then I saw it again, a figure, standing just beyond the reach of the lights, still as a statue. I couldn't make out much detail, but whoever it was seemed to be facing me, just standing there, watching. For a moment, I thought it might be one of the regulars from the diner playing a prank on me. But something about the way they stood so still, so silent, sent a chill down my spine. I told myself not to be paranoid, threw the car into reverse, and pulled out of the lot. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was still there, motionless, half hidden in the shadows. The drive back to my aunt's house was about 10 minutes through winding forest roads. Normally, I enjoyed the ride. It was peaceful, with the smell of pine in the air and the occasional deer crossing the road. But that night, the air felt heavy, and every shadow seemed deeper, more menacing. About halfway home, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't unusual to see another car on the road, even this late. But as the minutes passed, the car didn't pass me. It stayed behind me, maintaining the same distance no matter how fast or slow I went. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, maybe another diner employee heading home late. But my gut was telling me something was off. The way the car hovered just far enough behind me that I couldn't make out the driver. The way it stayed perfectly in sync with my every move, like it was following me on purpose. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to ignore the growing knot of fear in my stomach. My aunt's house was only a few minutes away. I just had to get there, lock the door behind me, and everything would be fine. Then the car behind me turned off its headlights. My heart lurched. 1 second, the road behind me was illuminated by 2 bright beams, and the next, it was swallowed by complete darkness. I could still feel the car there, tailing me, its tires whispering against the asphalt. But I couldn't see it anymore. I hit the gas. My little Honda roared in protest, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to my aunt's house now. The trees blurred past in the darkness as I sped down the road, my pulse hammering in my ears. I saw the turnoff to my aunt's driveway up ahead and jerked the wheel hard, nearly skidding off the road as I made the turn. I raced down the gravel path, my tires kicking up dust, and slammed on the brakes in front of the house. I threw the car in a park, jumped out, and ran to the front door, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to unlock the door. As soon as I was inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it, heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the small window in the door, expecting to see the other car at the end of the driveway. But the road was empty. No headlights, no sound. Just the quiet hum of insects in the night. I stood there for a long time, staring out into the darkness, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it had been nothing, just some local messing with me. Or maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I turned off the lights, made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and tried to shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I didn't tell my aunt what had happened. I didn't want to freak her out, but I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those headlights flicking off in the dark. The next morning, I checked my car, half expecting to find something weird, a scratch, a note, some sign that the person in the other car had been real. But there was nothing. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. I told myself to let it go, that it was just some random event I'd never understand. But a week later, I heard something on the news that made my blood run cold. A girl from a nearby town had gone missing. She'd been last seen at a diner just like the one I worked at, leaving late at night after her shift. Her car had been found abandoned on the side of a forest road, the keys still in the ignition. And the worst part? Witnesses reported seeing a dark car following her as she left work. A car that had turned off its headlights just before she disappeared. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't made it to my aunt's house that night. If I had stayed at the diner just a little longer, or if I hadn't noticed those headlights disappearing into the dark. All I know is I never worked another late shift again. So, here's the thing. You don't wake up one morning planning to steal a school bus. It just kind of happens. It was the night of the spring carnival, and the whole school was buzzing. The carnival was a big deal. Rides in the parking lot, junk food everywhere, and booze run by different clubs trying to fundraise. It was supposed to be one of those fun, carefree nights where you flirt with your crush over funnel cakes and ride the Ferris wheel until you puke. But no, my friends and I, because we're idiots, decided to take it to the next level. It started with a simple, offhand comment from my friend Luke. We were sitting by the dunk tank, watching our gym teacher get repeatedly dropped into the water by freshmen, when Luke leaned over and said, "You know what would be epic? If we stole one of those school buses." At first I laughed. I mean, who steals a school bus? But then Luke gave me that look. The one that says, "I'm only half joking, but I'll do it if you're in." The thing about Luke is that he has exactly two modes. I have a terrible idea, and let's do the terrible idea right now. And, like an idiot, I said, "You're serious, aren't you?" Luke grinned. 100%. Now here's where things start getting ridiculous. Behind the school, parked just out of sight, was a row of buses. They were supposed to stay there overnight until Monday morning, locked and secure. But, and this is important, our school's transportation department was run by people who clearly did not care. I'm not saying the bus drivers were lazy, but someone had definitely left the gate unlocked. And once Luke realized this, there was no going back. "It's a sign," he said, already walking toward the buses like he'd been planning this for years. Me? I hesitated. I mean, this wasn't just a small prank. This was Grand Theft Auto. Except instead of a sleek sports car, we were about to steal a 40-foot hunk of metal on wheels. But by the time my brain caught up with the gravity of the situation, Luke had already found the bus he wanted and was trying the door handle. Click! I swear the door just opened. No keys, no lock, nothing. It was like the universe wanted us to steal it. Now, here's the next problem. Neither of us knew how to drive a bus. Luke had a learner's permit, and I'd been driving my mom's minivan for a few months, but this thing was a monster. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at all the buttons and switches like I was in the cockpit of a spaceship. How do you even start this thing? I whispered. Luke leaned over, found a set of keys dangling from the dashboard, and said, "Dude, it's just right there." They left the keys in the ignition. I know what you're thinking. At this point, why not just walk away? But no. Luke gave me that stupid grin, and before I could think twice, I turned the key. Vroom. The engine roared to life, and the entire bus shook like a giant metal beast waking from a nap. I gripped the oversized steering wheel, feeling both terrified and powerful. This is a bad idea," I whispered. Luke slapped the dashboard. "Let's go." Now, in theory, a school bus should be easy to drive. It's just a big car, right? Wrong. The first thing I discovered is that buses are really hard to steer. I tried turning out of the parking lot, and the entire bus lurched sideways like a drunk elephant. Luke was laughing hysterically, which didn't help at all. "Stop laughing," I shouted. "I'm trying to concentrate." But he kept giggling, clinging to the seat as I narrowly avoided hitting a trash can. Somehow, we made it out of the parking lot and onto the road. And for a brief, glorious moment, we were free. It felt amazing, just two idiots in a stolen bus, cruising down Main Street like we owned the world. People on the sidewalk stared, and some kids from our school started cheering when they recognized us through the giant bus windows. But then Luke got another idea, and it was even worse than the first one. "Let's pick people up," he shouted. "What? Yeah, let's do a bus route. See how many people we can get on board." And because my brain had fully shut down at this point, I said, "Sure, why not?" We started driving around town, pulling over whenever we saw people we knew. Luke would lean out the window and shout, "Get on the bus. We're going for a ride." And for reasons I will never understand, people did. Within 10 minutes, we had a bus full of kids. Most of them carnival goers who had decided that an impromptu party bus was the best way to end their night. Someone found the bus's radio and blasted music through the overhead speakers. Another kid started throwing popcorn at people. It was chaos. I swear it felt like we were living in a movie. The bus was bumping down the road, music blasting, everyone shouting and laughing. For a moment, I thought, this is it. We've done it. We've pulled off the greatest prank in school history. And then we heard the sirens. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my stomach dropped. There they were, two cop cars with their lights flashing, closing in on us fast. "Oh my God," I whispered. "We are so dead." Luke's eyes were wide. "Floor it. It's a school bus." "I can't floor it." The bus was already maxed out at about 40 miles per hour, and those cop cars were gaining fast. I took a hard turn onto a side street, and the entire bus tilted dangerously to one side. People screamed and clung to the seats. "We're gonna die," someone shouted from the back. I was too busy trying not to crash to respond. The cops were still behind us, their sirens blaring louder than the music. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew we were so screwed. Finally, I saw an open lot up ahead, and I knew this was it. I swerved into the lot, hit the brakes, and the entire bus skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. Everyone bailed out of the bus at once, scattering like cockroaches. Luke and I sprinted toward a fence at the edge of the lot, hearts pounding, lungs burning. We didn't get far. Two cops tackled us before we even made it halfway. Long story short, we spent the night at the police station, waiting for our parents to pick us up. Luke's mom cried. My dad just shook his head and muttered, "What the hell were you thinking? The school?" "Yeah, we got suspended for a week and banned from all future school events, including graduation." But the story spread like wildfire, and for months afterward, people would come up to us and say, "You guys are the ones who stole the bus, right?" That was legendary. Was it stupid? Absolutely. Would I do it again? Probably not. But damn, it made for one hell of a story.